This session, I've been asked by Blue Shield to moderate, is about environmental sustainability. And I would like to highlight, before we go to the first message we have on video, I'd like to highlight in terms of environmental sustainability, the biggest, one of the main publications that came out in the last 2 years is this so-called European Cultural Heritage Green Paper. This is executive summary. I must say that I've never read the full report, but the executive summary is very useful, and it's by Europa Nostra, ICOMOS, and the European Investment Bank Institute, the EIB Institute. And in fact, this sets the scene, and it's very well organized, well-written document to put heritage in the Green Deal, in the heart of the Green Deal. Now, as a result of this initiative, there is currently a Climate Heritage Manifesto that was for COP27, and now there's an initiative for the next COP that is taking place next month in the Emirates. But there is also a network to which we are members, the CTN, we are members, we joined this network, the Climate Heritage Network. And there are a lot of organizations there, and this is the idea to put heritage in the climate action. And climate action, of course, is one of the SDGs, SDG number 13. And the other thing I would like to highlight is the report that came out from the DG EAC, Education and Culture, last year. It's about strengthening cultural heritage resilience for climate change. This is by the member states committee or open method of coordination. You can see the cover is the Acropolis, you can see on the snow, which doesn't happen very often. So having said that, for the heritage sector, for the tourism sector, there is another initiative by UNWTO. It's the Glasgow Declaration on Climate Action in Tourism. This is in general tourism activities. So as Cultural Heritage Network, Cultural Tourism Network, we're trying to bring together the cultural heritage with the tourism, so we bring together the initiatives of the Climate Heritage Network with the Glasgow Declaration of UNWTO. So without any further ado, we'll go now to watch a video message by Fergus McLaren. Fergus McLaren is the president of the ICOMOS International Committee, Cultural Tourism Committee, ICTC, and he was the main coordinator of the charter, the new charter that ICOMOS published last year after a lot of work, as we heard earlier. It was published last year. We were involved in some of the drafts initially through our member of the board, Jordi Teixeiras from Barcelona University. And as I said this morning, we don't compete with ICOMOS ICTC. On the contrary, we work together, and we'd like to use what ICTC has done for us. Because we have different emphases, we have European emphasis. We have also creativity, creative tourism as part of our charter. But obviously, ICOMOS charter started back in 1999. The first one, the major update last year. Very important developments for the international cultural tourism family. So we'll go now to the video of Fergus McLaren, who is actually in Canada. But this is a video, not a connection. So,
Calimera, good morning. My name is Fergus McLaren. I'm based in Canada, and I am the president of the ICOMOS International Cultural Tourism Committee. I would like to thank Blue Shield Greece, the Blue Shield Greek National Committee, for the kind invitation to provide you with these opening remarks. As many of you know, post-COVID, we are facing a number of challenges that are facing the tourism sector globally post-COVID. There are a number of elements such as meeting the intentions of the Sustainable Development Goals, specifically the targets that are related to cultural heritage and tourism, 8.9, 11.4, 12B, and 14.7, along with those other elements that we are looking at trying to best preserve cultural heritage, whether they are monuments or intangible cultural heritage, such as elements that are important for the day-to-day living and traditions and customs of everyday cultures, and of course the longer-term challenges such as climate change, working with local communities, the ability to deal with elements such as over-tourism, which is a prevalent factor within the Mediterranean countries, for example, and other elements that are really going to transform and change the face of how we manage our cultural heritage resources and also the cultural tourism that supports it. In terms of just giving you a bit of background, as I mentioned, I'm from Canada. But many of you might have seen the forest fires we experienced over the past year. By September 5th, we had experienced more than 6,000 fires, which had torched over 16.5 million hectares of land. And to put that in perspective, that's an area larger than Greece. And that's the amount of fire that we've experienced over the past 6 months. This represents a record $11 billion Canadian of impact. So again, it's significant with regard to the land loss, but also the impact on the overall economy within the country. And certainly tourism and perspectives of whether Canada was a safe country to visit or if it was able to be visited in certain parts that were affected by fire, they were certainly affected by climate change driven fires that we had across our country. Now, there are other issues that we were dealing with here in the Mediterranean, for example. I talked about over-tourism. Certainly you're seeing the impacts of climate change in Venice with the elevation of the water levels there, but you're also seeing the impacts of the increasing number of visitors where with the UNWTO, which is predicting a return close to around 95-97% of the visitor numbers that we had around the globe. Venice, of course, is one of those prime candidates where you are starting to receive the over-tourism impacts on the city. Other places have tried to deal with it, such as Barcelona, which has imposed regulations on Airbnb and short-term rentals, or Dubrovnik, which has looked at the restriction on the numbers of cruise ships entering per day, and other countries that are dealing with increasing numbers of visitors. You also have those countries that not only are dealing with flooding, as in the case of Venice and other coastal areas, but also the tragedy that unfolded in Greece this summer and spring with the fires in Rhodes and other coastal areas that we're seeing, beach areas and the aligning forestry and other sort of woodlands around them being affected by forest fires. So again, there are lots of serious, significant issues that are out there. That's why when I look at Reinherit and the work that's being done by this project, I'm actually very impressed in terms of the approach being used to try and develop a range of smart tools to deal with training, tourism, conservation, preservation, knowledge creation, content, illicit trafficking of goods, a whole range of items that are intertwined in terms of the tangible and intangible cultural heritage, planning, management, and monitoring that are out there. And I think that, this is a direction that will increasingly be needing to move towards. This is something that we are trying to emphasize and underline in our new ICOMOS International Cultural Heritage Tourism Charter that my excellent colleague, Dr. Celia Martinez-Yanez, will be presenting this morning. She co-led the development of the new charter and has done a really effective job in terms of ensuring that it's not only a document that is current, but one that is very forward-looking in addressing matters such as sustainability, climate change, regeneration, those elements that can really support those local communities that live in and around them. And I think that the Reinherit approach, using things like big data, using things like really important content creation for planning, management, and monitoring of sites is a really key direction that can be hopefully viewed as a solid and strong reference point moving forward. So that being said, Sepharisto, thank you very much for having me provide you with these opening remarks, and I wish you a successful event. Ciao.
Many thanks to Mr. McLaren, Fergus McLaren and ICOMOS. Now we have the first speaker, Professor Tanya Sarvati from the BS-GreekNationalCommittee Committee, and also the National Eastern University, I believe. Where I started, but now finished. The floor is yours.
Thank you.
The topic is the cultural heritage and environmental sustainability in an era of intersecting multilateralism.
Thank you. I'm afraid I will make a very short introduction, a fragmentary introduction of this vast topic for two reasons. First of all, environmental sustainability is related to the implementation of all SDGs. And secondly, the cultural heritage and environmental sustainability nexus is addressed in different institutional settings by a web of international institutions and organizations, both global and regional, with different goals, competencies, and states that participate in these institutional environments. So, culture's contribution to environmental sustainability is related to the conservation of the broader cultural ecosystem. By cultural ecosystem, we mean monuments and sites and the natural environment they're situated in, cultural landscapes, every type of cultural landscape, those intentionally designed and shaped by man, landscapes that are shaped by communities during the course of history, as well as associated landscapes that are linked to intangible values. Cultural manifestations, whether tangible or intangible, also contribute to the protection of nature through cultural practices and knowledge that ensure long-term biophysical sustainability in line with the ecosystem approach in environmental protection. In line with this approach, the concept of biodiversity is perceived in a broader sense as biocultural diversity, the diversity of life in all its manifestations, both biological and cultural. Within the context of the cultural ecology methodology, an alternative perception of the relation of human beings with their environment that has its root in the first UNESCO's attempts to overcome the museum-type protection of cultural and natural heritage, going back to the Man and Biosphere program of the 60s, and later on to the adoption of the World Heritage Convention in 1972. Now, at the EU level, there are two main strands where general environmental policy intertwines with cultural heritage protection. The first one is the environmental impact assessment legislation that assesses the direct and indirect significant impact of a project based on a wide range of environmental factors, including cultural heritage and landscape protection. And the synergies between Natura 2000 network and tangible and intangible heritage. It should be mentioned, however, that at the level of environmental policy strategies at the EU level, with the exception of climate change, the interaction of culture and nature is not taken into account systematically. An illustrative example is the EU 2030 biodiversity strategy that makes no reference to culture or cultural heritage. In contrast with the international instrument, the Biodiversity Convention, that clearly mentions habitats and communities that are of cultural importance, as well as cultural practices as a component of sustainable use of biodiversity or ecosystems. Moving to climate change, it is true that the climate change and cultural heritage nexus is hardly addressed in the multilateral climate change institutional framework and policy making, since the dominant focus of the latter lies on the decarbonization of economies and the technical details of limiting greenhouse gas emissions And of course, the significant challenges these commitments imply for the transition of national economies. The cultural dimension of climate change is not mentioned in the 1992 UN Climate Change Framework Convention. However, the latter provides certain general principles such as equity, common but differentiated responsibility, the precautionary principle and the principle of solidarity towards vulnerable and developing countries that constitute the normative framework for addressing the cultural heritage and climate change interplay. In the 2015 Paris Agreement, there is a slight change of mentality vis-à-vis cultural heritage. Referencing is made to the rights of indigenous peoples, to the protection of people, livelihoods and ecosystems, a broader people-centered approach, and to the combination of best available knowledge, science, with traditional knowledge, which is an integral part of intangible heritage. During COP27 in Egypt in 2022, the Sharm el-Sheikh Declaration was adopted that reflects this shift of mentality. This declaration opted for culture-based solutions concerning climate action, and it's the first attempt to bring culture more directly into the climate change agenda. It should be mentioned that the EU has ratified the Paris Agreement. European Union has adopted the European Green Deal, which is a strategy, the transition strategy, and the European Climate Law, which is the climate change transition legislation. None of them makes any special reference to cultural heritage, with the exception of the new European Bauhaus initiative and the report mentioned by Manos Boudoukas, released in 2022, entitled Strengthening Cultural Heritage Resilience for Climate Change, where the European Green Deal meets cultural heritage. The main work delivered, however, in this domain remains project-based. There is a number of EU-funded projects that provide technical solutions, guidance, and best practices or good practices for experts, as well as policy recommendations to increase the resilience of heritage sites facing disasters, mutating environments, climate change, etc. These projects are not policy instruments. They do not, they focus on specific dimensions of the environmental or climate change impacts on cultural heritage and vice versa. However, they produce tangible results, they provide innovative solutions, they identify gaps, threats, and gaps in policy making that have to be addressed, which is the first step for more comprehensive policy initiatives to follow. Moving on to the Cultural Heritage International Institutional Framework, the issue of climate change and cultural heritage interplay has been introduced in UNESCO's agenda during the last 2 decades. The main prevailing features of this attempt can be summarized as follows. First of all, these interplays mainly address in terms of risk management of tangible heritage, and to a lesser extent on how it will affect communities or the intangible aspects of culture, the human side of culture. Secondly, UNESCO's approach is fragmented, not only conceptually but also institutionally, as well as in terms of its operational dimensions, since it is found in different legal regimes, different policy regimes, structured around 4 main conventions, with different goals and different number of participating states, and of course different bodies that monitor their implementation. So What is the picture in terms of the incorporation of climate change impact on these different cultural policy regimes? It is true that two of these regimes have incorporated the climate change dimension in the operational guidelines adopted by the monitoring bodies of these instruments. There are several positive elements. The operational guidelines are soft law documents. So from a political standpoint, states are not reluctant to adopt them since they are not legally binding. On the other hand, these guidelines actually operate as a kind of secondary law. In practice, states cannot deviate from these guidelines without consequences on the status of their nominated sites or elements, or without jeopardizing a nomination process. From a normative standpoint, these guidelines interpret the Convention's text in the light of new challenges. So they contribute to the evolution of the normative content of states' obligations. And from an operational point of view, they introduce standards and methodologies in terms of the practical dimensions of cultural heritage safeguarding, such as management, nomination processes, and funding. Still, the main problem with the operational guidelines content is that the approach to climate change in its different regime is not uniform and comprehensive. Within the context of the World Heritage Convention, emphasis is given on adaptation. Within the context of the Intangible Heritage Convention, emphasis is given on mitigation. And climate change is not mentioned in the operational guidelines for the protection of underwater cultural heritage or for the protection, for the operational guidelines for the implementation of the Convention on the Protection and Promotion of Cultural Diversity. On the other hand, UNESCO has adopted a strategy for action on climate change that aimed at assisting member states to achieve the goals set out in the Paris Agreement and the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals, especially Goal 13, which directly concerns climate change. Another important point of reference, which is not frequently discussed, is the Declaration of Ethical Principles in relation to climate change adopted by UNESCO in 2017. There are 6 ethical principles related to climate change. Each one of them corresponds to concrete measures, and I will refer only to the dimensions of these principles that are applied to tangible cultural heritage and creativity, and could be applied by other international or regional institutions as well. The first principle has to do with the prevention of harm. For the cultural heritage and creativity sectors, including cultural industries, the tourism sector, and service providers, this means a shift towards low greenhouse gas emissions. We have many examples. The most illustrative one was the project on ending World Heritage Sites low carbon refurbishment, or the plans for tourism experiences with low carbon and pollution footprint in the process of transportation, accommodation, sightseeing, shopping, and entertainment, but also undertaking initiatives that strengthen community resilience to climate change. The second principle is the precautionary principle. It stresses the need for preventive action even when scientific uncertainty exists, as in the case of the lack of systematic scientific monitoring of the impact of climate change on intangible cultural heritage. In the UNESCO Convention, the precautionary approach is incorporated in the management plans both for protected sites and elements, as well as in the nomination process. The Convention's reporting systems also contribute towards the same. Equity and justice. Equity is interpreted both in synchrony, intergenerational equity, enjoyment of cultural heritage and respect of cultural rights by present generation, and in its diachrony, referring to intergenerational equity by linking culture with the concept of humanity. UNESCO conventions abide to these principles. However, in terms of justice, cultural heritage and creativity protection should be included in the broader climate justice debate, introduced formally by the Paris Agreement, both in terms of the distributed justice dimension, that is protecting the interests of groups, communities, or nations that are not responsible for the environmental degradation that led to climate change, as well as the dimension of procedural justice that is connected to enhanced public engagement, public participation in policy decision-making and implementation and incorporation of traditional values and knowledge in climate change mitigation policies, etc. Sustainable development, of course, in its three dimensions. Here, the adoption of the Sustainable Development Indicators by UNESCO in 2020 constitutes a significant step towards achieving uniformity in assessing the role of culture to sustainability. Solidarity. Climate change needs a global response and should be founded on solidarity. Solidarity may be translated into financial support for vulnerable heritage or societies, but also in terms of international, regional, or national initiatives addressing, for example, the relocation of populations, or even the status of climate refugees, and among other, their cultural rights. Scientific knowledge and integrity in decision-making. Sound decision-making in cultural heritage management should consider both scientific and traditional knowledge. This principle promotes science and specialized research methodologies, recognizes the value of traditional knowledge, and combines both by engaging local communities and groups in decision-making. The institutional framework is fragmented. The institutional framework is multi-level. However, we must not undermine the normative progress achieved during the last decades. What is needed now is a comprehensive approach that would address the phenomenon of contested multilateralism in the cultural heritage and environmental or climate change nexus, that is actually forum shopping by states, choosing in which multilateral setting each state will participate, or the cherry-picking approach in the reporting mechanisms vis-à-vis cultural heritage and environmental sustainability. This would require a comprehensive approach in terms of inclusive decision-making at the international level. Enhanced interinstitutional coordination is required. Secondly, coordination of reporting requirements by states, having as a point of departure the UNESCO indicators for sustainable development, and at the European level, the work being done for cultural statistics by Eurostat. In terms of state initiatives and national action plans, cultural heritage and climate change nexus should be addressed more systematically, and here UNESCO could provide general guidelines to states, something that is still missing. Funding. We do need guidance and developing synergies between the different financial instruments in this domain, including the World Bank, the Green Climate Fund, EU funding mechanisms, the European Investment Bank, and the Nordic Development Fund. Synergies between funding mechanisms from both public and private sectors should also be enhanced. The European Investment Bank and the European Commission Directorates for Regional and Urban Policy Initiative on the two new model financial instruments in support of the Repower Europe and the new European House initiatives could form a model towards this direction. Last but not least, we should invest on education in this domain. First of all, by introducing interdisciplinary educational curricula, drawing from natural and physical sciences, humanities, social sciences. This curriculum may combine common principles, promotion of sustainable development, but they should be designed considering the regional and local cultural and heritage and knowledge. Secondly, research and education in this domain should not be treated separately, but as a continuum. And last but not least, education should aim at developing, at transforming cultural ownership to cultural advocacy in relation to environmental sustainability. That is, aiming at developing certain civic skills vis-à-vis the cultural heritage and climate change or sustainability, environmental sustainability nexus. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and thank you very much for the recommendations you made at the end, because we have now the possibility or the luxury, in any way, in some way, that we can pass on these recommendations to, or we can make suggestions for the Horizon Europe Research and Innovation Agenda. And certainly there's gaps there. Your experience with climate change not being included properly will help the same. When we started in another project, we started in 2012, some people had the foresight at that time, in our charter, number one priority is climate change and heritage, or the climate change impacts of heritage. That's 2011 when the proposal was written. Therefore, at that time it was not such an important issue. When it comes to climate change, some people feel that it's a lost battle. I have this personal experience. My son did a master's degree in the University of Sussex for climate change policy and development. And when he came out of it, he said, "We're not going to make this." But he's trying. He's trying very hard. I mean, we should not stop trying, and particularly in the heritage sector and what it means for the heritage. If the heritage is destroyed or damaged by climate change impacts, then the cultural tourism is also destroyed. And this is, we have interest in destinations to ensure this doesn't happen in a digital way, in adaptation and mitigation measures. And this is in front of us up to 2030.
So I'd like to thank the Hellenic Committee of the Bush Shield as well, and especially Katrina, who has been both kind and very considerate to me since I've been here. And I was going to give you an account of the International Council of Museums' approach to sustainability. For over 30 years, Rita Mesquita, a researcher at the National Institute for Amazonian Research, has been studying and protecting almost inconceivably large tropical forests in Brazil, tens of millions of acres of protected areas. However, she realized the purpose of these protected areas was unknown to ordinary people, she writes. I got to thinking about the need to communicate with society more directly about biodiversity and the value of the Amazon. Her chance came with an invitation to run a new Amazonian museum. She knew she couldn't get all the city dwellers out into the wild jungles. So she brought the jungles to the people. Museums worldwide have long engaged in questions of sustainability, biodiversity, and ethical responsibilities. As the Museum of the Amazon shows, one of the central challenges for museums at this precipitous moment in history is how to communicate the threats to natural habitats and the lives and livelihoods they support. So the wider context of this presentation then is the museum's role in communicating and activating our communities in all matters pertaining to achieving a sustainable future. Within this wider context, the aim of the presentation is to give an account of the International Council of Museums' approach to sustainability. Viewing museums as containing the essence of vast forests of knowledge, a term coined by Ulysses Aldrovandi, a distinguished Renaissance naturalist, who established the world's first botanical gardens in Bologna in the 16th century. It will consider museums as nodes in a global knowledge network, facilitating responses to the crisis of sustainability and climate breakdown facing museums and our communities. So the term sustainability was introduced into public discourse at the conference on the human environment in Stockholm in '72 and reaffirmed in the Brundtland Report in '87, where sustainable development was defined as meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. However, already here we need to stop and reflect what needs. Arne Næss, Norwegian philosopher and father of the deep ecology movement, proposed that the Brundtland definition should be amended to read that it's sustainable development if, and only if, it meets the vital needs of the present-day human population without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own vital needs. Næss wrote, "We who live in the global north often accept needs that, if met, exclude sustainable development in every acceptable sense." He maintained that if we have an ethical obligation to our fellows, then anything that serves the vital needs of future generations must take priority. As far as the satisfaction of these vital needs, he wrote in 1990, at present, a substantial number of human beings live in a desperate state of poverty and oppression, which clearly prevents a minimum satisfaction of those vital needs. He also notes that this doesn't mean that we have no serious obligations towards non-human beings, classes, and systems of such beings, or the earth as a whole. 30 years later, as we view the state of the planet, the situation has not improved. Now, the ethics or sustainability of foreign concepts to museum professionals, at a time when ICOM is revising its own code of ethics, it is also programmatically committed by the new 2022 definition to researching, collecting, conserving, and interpreting the world's natural and cultural heritage, present and future, tangible and intangible. This notion of custodianship for future generations in the management of heritage has long formed part of museums' ethical self-conception. Furthermore, it's not without significance that the history of ICOM, founded in 1946, also straddles the period of immense change the planet has experienced in the years since '46. Described as a great acceleration and leading us on to the cusp of the Anthropocene, this period encompasses a massive expansion in carbon emissions, threats to the biodiversity, and other human impacts on the Earth system. And what can be seen as the global society's response to the great acceleration, UN member states signed 2 treaties in 2015. The UN Agenda 2030 and the Paris Agreement. The former aims to transform our world through the means of 17 Sustainable Development Goals, while the latter to reverse emissions of climate gases. Unfortunately, neither of these treaties have had any significant effect on the crises they were created to address. But what of ICOM? How has it responded to the unsustainable nature of the Great Acceleration? ICOM itself began to address sustainability with its organisation in the middle of the last decade, building on the concept of custodianship for future generations. It responded to the 2 above-mentioned treaties by establishing a working group on sustainability. Its mission to help ICOM consider how to mainstream Agenda 2030 and the Paris Agreement. And in the words of ICOM's president, museums were to be understood as relevant institutions promoting communities' knowledge about the climate crisis and sustainable behaviour. The working group's first mandate period culminated in this resolution on sustainability and the implementation of Agenda 2030 at the General Conference in Kyoto. The resolution committed ICOM to aligning all its practices with the SDGs and highlights how museums, as trusted sources of knowledge, are invaluable resources for engaging communities and are ideally positioned to empower the global society to collectively imagine, design, and create a sustainable future. The resolution's adoption and implementation not only marked a recognition of the scale of the challenges to ICOM and its members, but also the urgency of addressing those challenges. This was confirmed in a speech by ICOM's president Alberto Garandini to the G20 ministers for culture in 2021, stating that the resolution has led to the 2030 agenda becoming the fundamental reference for ICOM's work over the next decade and beyond. The resolution addressing sustainability can be seen as marking ICOM's entrance onto the global stage of sustainability and climate discussions, as evidenced by its presence at the last two COPs, invitation to address the G20 ministers, and participation in a number of European Union initiatives. However, and perhaps more interestingly, ICOM, as a member-driven global organisation, can also be viewed as a receptive framework for the development of local, sustainable initiatives, bottom-up approaches along the lines suggested by Elena Ostrom, Nobel Prize-winning economist and theorist of the commons, who wrote after the failure of the Copenhagen COP in 2008, "Do not despair if politics moves slowly at the international and national levels, because a diversity of actors and institutions is already self-organizing in ways that will help to compensate for the collective inaction problems at a high level." Evidence of such a diversity of actors and institutions can be found in the many initiatives addressing sustainability undertaken in recent years by both individual members and member institutions, the ICOM family. Also in the many significant network initiatives undertaken by ICOM's national and international committees, and one can also point to the success of International Museum Day, which is each tied to 3 SDGs. Here it is possible to discern the contours of a developing many-centred, non-hierarchical community addressing sustainability, and to view museums of different size, scale and scope worldwide as nodes in a global knowledge network, facilitating responses to the challenges of sustainability. This, of course, resonates fully with the Reinherit model that was talked about earlier on. During its second mandate period, the working group was given the task of developing a framework sustainability action plan. And this second mandate period was also distinguished by 4 other major internal processes in ICOM. Define, which created the new museum definition, strategic plan, revision of the code of ethics, and sustain, the international committee. In each of these important processes, the ICOM's members confirmed that addressing sustainability was a priority. So, since the middle of the last decade then, there has been a growing awareness throughout ICOM of the necessity of museums meeting the existential challenges that the world and all its inhabitants are facing, often using their collections. And if there's any doubt about the relevance of collections meeting these challenges, a collection of 5,000 delicately cut and dried pressed flowers from the hillsides of Bologna 500 years ago is unlocking knowledge about the climate crisis and human migration, and is changing in the changing landscapes in northern Italy. Picked between 1551 and 1586 by the aforementioned naturalist Ulysses Aldrovandi, coiner of forests of knowledge, according to research published earlier this month by the British Royal Society. This is nearly half a millennium later. These carefully pressed specimens are helping botanists document these enormous changes that are taking place in northern Italy. I would also like to draw your attention briefly before closing to the role of museum research in the transition to a sustainable future. The research project floating that I am involved in at present has its origins in the historical timber industry in Norway, where rivers were the only way of moving timber from forest to the customers, a much more sustainable method than today. The project is a collaboration between 4 universities, 5 museums, the Norwegian Directorate of Cultural Heritage, and representatives of ICOM and Norway's UNESCO offices. Nature is at the centre of the sustainability debate. The world's forests are crucial for global weather systems, for any strategy to mitigate the devastating impact of climate change, and for the survival of the vast majority of the world's known and unknown living species. Moreover, forests represent one of the clearest examples of a sustainable system, both metaphorically and in reality. The project has three goals: to carry out research on the Norwegian Forest Network core themes, to develop perspectives and methods in research that build on the United Nations Sustainability Goals, and to discuss professional development, research relevance, and research dissemination in order to make the museum's social role more concrete. As part of the research project Floating, we've run a future scenario building workshop focusing on how museums can foster sustainability, investigating questions such as: which direction is the sector heading into in the future? What happens if we can't collect anymore? Or can't build new facilities? Is bigger better? Instead of expanding, can museums scale down? Degrowth is an important question. And how would that accord with museums seeking a more active role in fostering sustainability for the local communities? Is there a pathway into the future that allows museums to operate as today? Can we continue with business as usual, or does this sector need to transform itself completely? I'll leave you with these questions and answers. Hopefully some answers will be given when the research is published in 2024. ICOM then has created a robust organisational structure to face the challenges of the immediate future to 2030 and beyond. And it's also worth bearing in mind that the gradual recognition of museums as socially embedded knowledge institutions has resulted in individual museums and museum practitioners exerting pressure for change regarding engagement in sustainability. Indeed, although this presentation has given an account mainly of ICOM's organisational approach to sustainability, there's a strong case to be made that it is the individual, locally anchored museum that could play the decisive role in the response of the global museum sector to the societal, economic and environmental crisis facing the planet. Perhaps through offering arenas, centres of knowledge commons, where each community can express its own engagement and activism in addressing pathways to sustainable futures. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And indeed, these questions, when answered, will be of great interest. And again, I would say that we have the facility to pass on some recommendations to the next program, which will run until 2030, therefore horizons are consistent, and we can make some influence, not a lot, but some influence we can exert on policy making and the program, the development of the program and the calls to the forward. So now we go into the second video.
Hello, my name's Matt Trinker, and I'm sorry I can't be with you in person for this conference, but I am joining you from Canberra, Australia, the nation's capital, on the lands of the Ngunnawal, Noonawal, Ngambri First Peoples. And today, as we reflect on the risks and challenges of dealing with rising threats of natural disasters and, at least for those of us here in Australia, the El Nino summer ahead, it's really important for us to remember how much we can learn from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples about how to live more sustainably on the planet. Blue Shield Australia is the National Committee of Blue Shield, the international organisation working to protect the world's cultural heritage threatened by armed conflict and natural disasters. As an organisation, Blue Shield International owes its existence to the 1954 Hague Convention for the Protection of Cultural Property in the event of armed conflict, which was written after World War II to really establish rules to protect cultural property in times of war. Today, of course, Blue Shield is best understood as a network of committees of dedicated individuals across the world committed to the protection of the world's cultural property and is concerned with the protection of cultural and natural heritage, tangible and intangible, in the event of armed conflict, natural or human-made disaster. Blue Shield, therefore, is increasingly concerned with protecting the world's cultural heritage from natural and human-made disasters of all kinds, not least because we live in this age of human-induced climate change that's radically altering the world in which we live. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report of 2023 said that the Earth has already warmed by, at best guess, 1.1 degrees since 1900 due to human activities. Importantly, this means we're already dealing with the effects of climate change. As the committee reported, widespread and rapid changes in the atmosphere, ocean, cryosphere and biosphere have already occurred. Human-caused climate change is already affecting many weather and climate extremes in every region across the globe. This has led to widespread adverse impacts and related losses and damages to nature and people. Vulnerable communities who have historically contributed the least to current climate change are disproportionately affected. Now, in responding to these threats to our shared cultural heritage, Blue Shield is informed by a series of international legal instruments, but also by the International Cultural Protection Agenda set by the UN and UNESCO, and indeed by international initiatives regarding environmental disaster. In particular, the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction is a critical international framework to assist nations in reducing and dealing with the risks related to disasters. The framework was adopted at the 3rd UN Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction in Sendai, Japan on March 18, 2015, hence its name. The Sendai Framework is a 15-year voluntary non-binding agreement which is the outcome of stakeholder consultations initiated in March 2012 and intergovernmental negotiations from July 2014 to March 2015, all of which were supported by the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction at the request of the UN General Assembly. The Sendai Framework is a successor instrument to the Hyogo Framework for Action, 2005 to 2015, entitled Building the Resilience of Nations and Communities to Disasters, which itself emerged from the documents and work that were established and undertaken through the 1990s. Now, at its foundation, Sendai recognises that the state has the primary role to reduce disaster risk, but that the responsibility should be shared with other stakeholders, including local government, the private sector, and other stakeholders. The critical shift in emphasis in Sendai came with the focus placed on disaster risk management instead of disaster management. That is, it's focused more on proactive steps and actions that can be taken to deal with the threats of disasters, and not simply on the more reactive actions that can be taken to deal with the actual circumstances of those events. In overall terms, the Sendai Framework aims for the following outcome: the substantial reduction of disaster risk and losses in lives, livelihoods, and health, and in the economic, physical, social, cultural, and environmental assets of persons, businesses, communities, and countries. Note, importantly, the stress placed here in this fundamental aim upon the cultural assets of persons, businesses, and communities and countries. It's this which tells us that for all of us concerned about the preservation of cultural heritage around the world, the Sendai Framework is centrally important. The goal then of the framework is to prevent new and reduce existing disaster risk through the implementation of integrated and inclusive economic, structural, legal, social, health, cultural, educational, environmental, technological, political, and institutional measures that prevent and reduce hazard exposure and vulnerability to disaster, increase preparedness for response and recovery, and thus strengthen resilience. Again, note the emphasis here on implementing integrated measures across a whole range of sectors, including the cultural sector, that reduce risk, increase preparedness for response and recovery, and strengthen resilience. The 4 priorities for action under Sendai are: Priority 1, understanding disaster risk. Priority 2, strengthening disaster risk governance to manage disaster risk. Priority 3, investing in disaster risk reduction for resilience. And Priority 4, enhancing disaster preparedness for effective response and to build back better in recovery, rehabilitation and reconstruction. Now, as I said before, the Sendai framework specifically notes the need to protect cultural assets and values of communities threatened by conflict and disaster, and more specifically, to invest in ensuring that cultural heritage collections are adequately protected from these risks. In the actions listed under Priority 1, for instance, understanding disaster risk, the framework says that we should, at national and local levels, systematically evaluate, record, share, and publicly account for disaster losses and understand the economic, social, health, education, environmental, and cultural heritage impacts as appropriate in the context of event-specific hazard exposure and vulnerability information. In Priority 3, investing in disaster risk reduction for resilience, Sendai asks again at national and local levels to protect or support the protection of cultural and collecting institutions and other sites of historical, cultural heritage and religious interest. Across the document, there is recurring reference to the needs of the cultural sector and for disaster planning and response to properly address the needs of cultural heritage and cultural interests more generally in communities. I urge you to learn more about the specific provisions of the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction and download key documents and tools on the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction website. What's clear is that the Sendai framework is important for all of us involved in the global movement to protect the cultural heritage of nations. In the first instance, the emphasis on risk reduction, as well as response and recovery, is a lesson to us all as we seek to properly prepare organisations and individuals within the cultural sector for the threats they face from natural and man-made disasters of all kinds. Moreover, the 4 key priorities, it seems to me, are very useful guides to how we might address these issues in our own organisations and communities that are devoted to cultural work. To understand risk, to strengthen disaster risk governance, to build resilience through disaster risk reduction, and to enhance our preparedness to respond and recover. Importantly, however, the UN General Assembly is asking through Sendai that member states look to incorporate and address the needs of cultural heritage preservation in their communities as part of their general disaster risk and preparedness planning. And this is the key, because it places cultural heritage of a nation alongside the interests of human safety, business security, infrastructure, and national assets of all kinds in implementing the framework. Now, I can't speak for other nations' experience, but in Australia, which is fully engaged in implementing the Sendai framework at a national and local level, more needs to be done to foreground the needs of the cultural heritage sector as part of the more general work of enhancing disaster risk reduction. Let me explain. In Australia, the new National Emergency Management Authority, established last year, is responsible for implementation of the Sendai framework in this country. In 2019, the National Resilience Task Force in the Department of Home Affairs led the work which resulted in publication of the National Disaster Risk Reduction Framework, broadly aligned with the Sendai framework. Together with the Australian Disaster Preparedness Framework, these documents broadly correspond and address the priorities of the Sendai framework. We've just completed in Australia the mid-term review of our implementation of the Sendai framework, and that too is worth reading. Interestingly, there is very little evidence in that review of any real reflection upon how disaster risk reduction, planning and preparedness is fully addressing the need, as outlined in Sendai, to integrate the needs and interests of cultural heritage preservation in that work. I suspect that we're not alone in this in Australia. Understandably, there's a real effort being made right around the world, and our own experience in the last 5 years indeed of bushfires, of floods and of COVID has encouraged us all to make great efforts in implementing Sendai. And this is what we're focused on at Blue Shield Australia. But there's still more to be done in ensuring that member states, among them my own country of Australia, focus upon the need to incorporate the needs of cultural heritage in the world as they deal with the business of reducing risk and planning for response and recovery in the case of natural disasters. In conclusion then, I would urge you to become familiar with Sendai and to use it more actively as leverage with government to achieve improvements and integration of the concerns of the cultural heritage sector in all disaster risk reduction, planning and preparedness. Thank you.
Very well prepared video. I suppose the videos will be available to watch again if you're interested. So now we come back to the Reinherit Consortium. We have two presentations. The first one is by Jussi Kardia from Matera Hub on the support of creative and cultural industries to the green transition. And we also went through this I presented the importance of cultural creative industries contribution. So, what is yours?
Thank you very much. Does it work? Yes. Hi, renew again my congratulations on the organization of this very interesting conference. So before I've spoken about the cross-fertilization, now I'm going to speak about the support of the creative and cultural industries to the green transition. Just to have as a previous researcher, I used to do the background and the context first, and then I go to the case studies. Just to summarize the most important relevant facts in green transition in Green Deal, I just summarized the most important point. In 2015, as you know, 190 countries, they have agreed on the global deal of tackling the climate change by signing the Paris Declaration. That is basically a goal that we have to increase the global average temperature to below 2 degrees and above the pre-industrial levels. Then also we have to pursue the effort to limit the temperature increase to 1.5 degree above the pre-industrial levels. Another important aspect that signed the history of the climate change and the green transition was the European Green Deal in 2019. So the Europe committed to be climate neutral by 2050 by issuing this Green Deal and demanding stronger action coming from citizens. So the involvement of the community as well was stronger. In 2022 there was this important Creative Pact for Skills partnership for the culture and creative industries, so I go through the main point, to establish a shared model for skill development in Europe to pull all the resources and engage in a concrete and upskilling and reskilling initiative in the culture and creative industries with a particular focus on digital, green, entrepreneurial and technical skills. I go again to the skills ones because that is our main purpose at the Matera Hub. Then the current global framework regarding the regarding the ability to deal with the impacts of climate change and to the need of building a resilience and decreasing the vulnerability to the adverse effect of climate change. So, as part of the program, as we said, the many solutions outlined in Green Deal, as well as in the Pact of Skills and in the Kick for Culture and Creativity, can succeed only if the citizens, the communities, the company, the organization, they work together. They go towards the same direction, which is the climate, environmental, social, and economic challenges as a global issue. The European Climate Pact, in support of the Agenda 2030, we have heard about the agenda several times in this session, but even this morning, and the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goal, they are taught in a way that they have to bring together the region, the local communities, all the civil society, what we call the quadruple helix, to design and drive a change in behavior and trying to grasp the opportunity to implement decisive action in our lifestyle, decisive and sustainable action, of course. Then, someone mentioned before as well, the new European Bauhaus that prioritizes the goal of achieving the European Green Deal through a collaborative design and creative space where artists, scientists, designers, students, they can work together to the same direction, okay? So nobody is excluded, basically. The fourth part is the Rome Declaration of the G20 Culture Ministry in 2022. They also said that the artists and the creative, they are to work together in a way that culture serves the climate change in some way, okay? So helps to support the climate change and power and change. Then the manifesto for the new Pact of Skills in Culture and Creative Industry also recognizes the green competencies. I go back to what I said before, the importance of the combination of those skills and the relevance of the culture and creative industry for the green competencies, okay? And the role of the sector in fostering the green transition of the European society. Last but not least, we mentioned before the culture and creativity, the KIC, the knowledge of community, the knowledge information community, that focus on education, aiming at creating a kind of interdisciplinary education program towards the green aspect, okay? To create those skills in order to combine, to cross-fertilize the sectors. So culture and creative on one side, and green and the other on the other side. We have just to highlight some main data. We know that there is from the culture and creative point of view, there is a global contraction that basically we lost $750 billion of the gross value added by the culture and creative industries in 2022 due to the pandemic problem. We have a loss in revenue between 20 and 40% across the different countries. We have a massive job losses estimated to upward 10 million of job losses. We have a lack of opportunities due to the sustainability, to the decrease of those opportunities, and the problem that those the culture and creative industries are characterized by micro companies. We have a really huge decrease of opportunities for those companies. We have also these pre-existing facilities, fragilities of the culture and creative industries that, together with the post-COVID repercussion of the economy, have created a very big problem. And also the less opportunities that they have, that they characterize the culture and creative industries, because, as we said, there are micro companies that they characterize more the culture and creative industries, and these imply the less capital, less skills, less competencies, less research, less technology compared to the larger field. And that also, of course, implies that the risk of failure for those, for the culture and creative industries is much higher, okay? Why I'm saying that? Because I'm trying to settle the scenario to justify some of the projects that have been implemented by Materab. Let me go to this one. One of those, let me go back. One of those case studies that I mentioned here is the Creative Agent. So it's one project called Connecting the Creative and Cultural Industries with Sustainable Development. It's an Erasmus Plus. It's a KA 2020. That is a cooperation, a partnership in vocational education and training. And there are 4 countries involved: Cyprus, Greece, Spain, and Italy. I personally carried on this project within Madeira. The Creative Agent project, the aim is trying to support the vet provider in the adaptation of the training, offering a kind of changing in the skills for the creative and culture operators in order to become, as we know, of course, all the professionals in this sector, they have their creativity, their soft skills. But what we are trying to do with this project is trying to transfer those kind of skills in terms of entrepreneurial, digital, and green skills once again, in order to prepare a new profile, a new job profile, a more complete profile with the creative agent who encompasses all these skills. And the creative agent should be also capable of creating synergies with the other economic sector. This is the cross-fertilization that I was saying before, okay? So in order to have that, we are trying to prepare what is called a toolbox for the creative agent in order to transfer those skills. So basically, that is in line, of course, with the new European Bauhaus initiative that we mentioned before, and the creative agent reinforces the interaction between the culture and creative industries and the sustainable development by creating these environment for green growth, innovation, and community empowerment. The creating agents, they take the green and the digital challenges as the opportunity to change the perspective of their environment, of their life as well, to transform their life and our life for contributing to the creation of a bridge between the world of science and technology and the world of art and culture. Also, the fact that there is this transfer of entrepreneurial skills makes try to how can I say, to improve the situation of after the post-pandemic scenario. What else? This is another project. Sorry, I forgot to say that is a Green Circle, is another Erasmus program. In this project, we are trying to join together higher education institution and VET, industrial research, to support the culture and creative operators and organizations to go green and to make, to turn more sustainable players to tackle climate change. So once again, the skills are important. Okay, the transfer of those skills to make, to combine, to cross-fertilize culture and creative industry and climate change and green transition as a stronger partnership. So the idea is to transfer the perspective from a human-centered or user-centered perspective to a wider sustainable centered and impact-centered perspective. It's very important, the Green Circle project, because it contributes to the creative pact of skills that we mentioned before, that address the needs of delivering tools and resources which support the main priorities of this manifesto. So skills and competencies for the digital environment, management, funding, business, entrepreneurial skills for the resilient recovery of post-COVID-19, skills to support and to integrate the green transformation in day-to-day activity, and the green transition of organization, promotion and acceleration of cross-sectorial innovation. That not only can benefit the artist in itself, the creative professional, but also the society at large. We have to say that the goal of Green Circle is also empowering the creative operator to sustainable change maker in the industries and sector, but also sustainable wave makers in other industries and sectors. So to create that cross-fertilization that we were mentioning before. It improved the ability of the creative operators to drive sustainable development for themselves, as I said, and also for the other sector, and also to facilitate, to enable these operators to create, to foster the sustainable development by contributing to necessary transition processes. The last one, the idea is to formulate a new professional profile. Before we said that the profile was the creative agent in the creative agent project. In this one is the sustainable facilitator, okay? And the Green Circle supports all participants in providing tangible insight into how green and professionality to the skills of culture and creative industry and improvement or change, how cross-fertilization between culture and creative industries and other industries. Now the project has improved capacity for partners to work at the European level, but also making the Erasmus, highlighting the Erasmus Plus program and other European values. Okay, the last slide. So other objectives and activities that have been developed through the Green Circle project are the identification of the specific gaps in green, entrepreneurial and digital skills for the creative and culture industries, the creation of the Green Circle training on sustainable skills, and we have encouraged 120 cultural professional learners in understanding new Green Deal, the establishment of a sustainable, oriented and multi-stakeholder ecosystem for culture and creative industries by creating a network of living lab covering 9 countries and gathering more than 200 participants. And last but not least, develop a repository of support tool, scheme, methodologies, basically a toolbox to ensure that the creative and cultural industry operators, they can improve, they can boost this resilience also in terms of post-pandemic scenario. And that's it. Thank you.
And the other thing is, if you have good practices that we can report from this Erasmus, by all means we can include them in the database. So now come to the last presentation of this session, back to the Reinherit Consortium. Jaime Lopez from Arcos Sostenible in Barcelona will speak about cultural heritage and environmental sustainability. This is also the handbook.
Yes, of course. We started okay, thank you very much. Okay, yes, I'm going to give the last presentation of this third section about cultural heritage and environmental sustainability. This session focuses on the Reinherit project's contribution to environmental sustainability. Well, I want to begin this presentation to reflect again on how cultural heritage today faces a growing threat from environmental degradation and climate change. Climate change and environmental issues have had an enormous impact on conservation and preservation of tangible and intangible heritage, and it has become a crucial part of the sector's commitment with respect to society. So environmental degradation is having an adverse impact on cultural heritage sites around the world, rising sea levels, extreme water events, pollution, etc., that causing an irreparable damage to our monuments, artifacts, and landscape. But these threats are not only endangering our physical heritage, but also eroding our sense of identity and connections to our past. In this unfavorable context, environmental sustainability emerges as a challenge to be achieved urgently. Environmental sustainability is one of the 3 dimensions, pillars of sustainability, and refers to the responsible use of natural resources and the protection of ecosystems to ensure their long-term viability. So it's involved making decisions and taking actions to consider the ecological, social, and economic aspects of environment. So this recognizes the interconnection of human activities with the natural environment. Practices contribute not only to the preservation of the natural environment, but also to the safeguarding of the stories, traditions, and artifacts that make up our shared cultural heritage. So, cultural heritage and environmental sustainability are linked. By one side, environmental sustainability can contribute to the preservation of cultural heritage, but at the same time, cultural heritage has an important role because can contribute to environmental, social, and economic sustainability. It's a mutual contribution. Okay, so it's not moving here, but it's moving, sorry, in there. Okay. Despite of this fact, none of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals focuses exclusively on cultural heritage or just in culture. However, agenda includes several explicit references to cultural aspects. For instance, the target 4.7 that refers to learners to acquire knowledge, skills to promote sustainable development, appreciation of cultural diversity, that's well very important. Target 8.3 addresses the promotion of development oriented to policies, even to creativity. With creativity, we can link that to culture. Targets 8.9 and 12b refer to promotion of culture, sustainable tourism, including local culture. And target 11.4 is important. It's the only one that directly talks about strengthening efforts to protect and safeguard the world's cultural and natural heritage. Like many organizations, the Reinherit project consortium is contributing to raise the visibility of cultural heritage in sustainable development debates. Like, for instance, this conference is very important to promote, to advocate the role of heritage at global, national, and local levels of policy and practice, as well as within the academia. Last year, some of the initiatives of Europe paper reports has specifically advocated for this crucial role of cultural heritage in achieving sustainability. For instance, the European Union's Framework for Action of Cultural Heritage identifies sustainability as one of its 5 pillars, highlighting the potential of cultural heritage to enhance social capital, boost economic growth, and secure environmental sustainability. And now someone is moving this, and I can't. Okay, thank you. It's crazy. It's moving here and then. Okay. The European Green Deal that Antonia Zervaki mentioned before is the Europe's response to the major challenges posed by the climate change. That aims to make Europe the first climate neutral continent. However, cultural heritage was not explicitly mentioned in the Green Deal. That's why some groups were talking about exploring the contributions of cultural heritage to the European Green Deal, and that's why they started to identify threats and gaps related to cultural heritage in the context of climate change. That's why they wrote this report that Antonia mentioned of strengthening, and Manus mentioned, strengthening cultural heritage resilience for climate change, that formulates a set of key recommendations for policymakers based on the key findings. At the same time, the European Cultural Heritage Green Paper, this groundbreaking document, demonstrates that the relevance of cultural heritage for achieving the ambitious goals of the European Deal are crucial. It's important that this paper correlates the contribution of cultural heritage to all key areas of the European Green Deal, including clean energy, circular economy, renovation wave, smart mobility, transport, green finance and just transition, research and innovation, education and training, as well as green deal diplomacy. Propose a series of concrete recommendations both for policymakers and for cultural heritage stakeholders. in order to contribute to face this threat, the cultural heritage sector has new challenges to achieve in many ways, because really a new role in the cultural heritage sector has been reconceptualized as a resource and process that can make a positive contribution to environmental sustainability. So these are the three main measures that should be taken into account. The first one should be the support sustainable practices in the cultural heritage management of museums and heritage sites, because they need to adopt sustainable practices in their operations, incorporating environmental considerations into the management plans, like for instance, taking measures to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, energy efficiency measures, waste reduction, cosmetic materials, etc., etc. Secondly, raise environmental awareness. That means like we need to educate the public about the link between cultural heritage and environmental sustainability. This can be done through educational programs, public awareness campaigns, and community engagement initiatives. And third, investing in research and innovation. And we need to invest in research to better understand the impact of the environmental degradation of cultural heritage and develop innovative solutions for its protection. It can include developing new materials and technologies, digital technologies for conservation, as well as exploring ways to adapt cultural heritage sites to changing climate. Well, so we can think about now the Reinherit Prize contribution that really complying with the three measures I have just mentioned, because the Reinherit Prize is really precisely disseminating sustainable practices in the cultural heritage management. The Reinherit Prize is raising environmental awareness, and the Reinherit Prize is investing in research and innovation with all kinds of applications, etc. So all these innovations are included, as you know, in the digital hub, but the Reinherit Prize has been contributing also with detecting these challenges that I mentioned this morning. Some of them are related to climate change. When we detected this dimension, the climate change dimension, that these challenges and opportunities included in the Reinherit handbook are crucial to understand how the process is, and these are going to be very useful to implement environmental friendly practices, such, for instance, the use of renewable energy resources, the adoption of climate control, storage solutions, and other environmentally friendly solutions. Apart from that, we started a podcast in the Reinherit project 1 year ago, and many of the episodes of the podcast are related to environmental sustainability. I was selecting very carefully people around the world very committed to environmental sustainability. Here I can put some samples of this intervention. For instance, I want to highlight this episode about action for climate empowerment that it was given by this woman from the Museum of the Australian Museums. So she's highlighting the importance of the ACE, is to empower all members of society to engage in climate action through the 6 AC elements: climate change, education and public awareness, training, public participation, public access to information, and international cooperation on these issues. Another one I want to highlight is this one given by actually here in Paris. This is the director of this very small institution. It's the Van Eyck institution in Holland. It's a perfect example of how can a small institution be contributing a lot to climate change, not only in their own operations, but also in programming public conversations called environmental identity. Is very interesting, with the screenings, online, offline events, and promoting the dialogue between cultural practitioners and researchers from the natural and the social sciences. And then we have this one about the Rome, the Royal Ontario Museum in Canada. I had the pleasure to meet the first Soren Brothers, the first curator of climate change in a museum, and even he has an assistant who is helping him, Sarah Kamau, in the future with project coordination. I want to highlight this. It's important to create new positions in museums and heritage sites in order to face all these threats in climate change. So they are in charge of programming climate change issues and in all departments in the museum. We also have the Reinherit webinars. Some of them are addressing climate change and environmental issues, like for instance, this one organized by the Barco Cyprus Cultural Foundation, how to make your museums green, that presents innovative sustainability and climate action practices that can be integrated into various aspects of museums and other cultural institutions and sites. So they are giving us tips about how to create a museum green. Then we have this one, the contribution of modern technologies of the protection and archaeological sites in monuments and environmental of intense climatic phenomena. We need this kind of project, very interesting about new technologies in order to protect our, to prevent potential damage to the cultural and natural heritage without human losses. Here, these experts are talking about how to use digital technologies such as robotics, big data, Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, and so on. And then this webinar I was giving about how to make this museum, I wanted to clarify ideas on the concept of museum and sustainability, leading to a better understanding of the role of the 21st museum, giving museums, especially small and medium museums, some ideas, guidelines for them to develop a sustainable action plan in order to implement that measure we are recommending. And then, of course, we have these exhibitions that Nefeli and Andrea were explaining, the three Reinherit exhibitions that are very important because they are really a poor example of sustainable exhibitions, because they are following the principles of reuse, recycling, prioritizing modular architecture, like you can see here in this architecture of the exhibition, favoring portably and local production is very important, and helping to reduce the carbon footprint. So it's very clear that they are based on these principles that you can see in this plot. And then just to end the presentation, just to mention some recommendations about environmental dimensions of sustainable development. The first one is policy emphasis on environmental protocols. It's important to adapt and enforcing comprehensive environmental protocols in the cultural heritage sector. Is imperative, establishing and mandating the adoption of these protocols to mitigate their best environmental impacts. So governments should develop and implement these mandatory environmental protocols for museums and heritage sites. The second one is to invest in training and knowledge development. We are addressing the lack of training and knowledge, right? So we need investing on that, and we need even funding for this training in these cases. And then the last one is the integration of cross-cutting environmental sustainability policies. Policymakers should advocate for the integration of cross-cutting environmental sustainability policies in the cultural sector. This entails aligning conservation efforts with broader sustainability goals, ensuring that museums and heritage sites not only preserve cultural treasures, but do so in a manner that minimizes environmental impact, contributing to a more resilient and ecologically conscious heritage management approach. Okay, so with this slide I finish my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and of course anything that comes out of this can be reported as good practices. Also in our recommendations, since you mentioned recommendations for the research and innovation agenda for Horizon Europe. We finish now this third session. We have a break, 5 minutes maybe, because we're already running 50 minutes behind schedule, 10 minutes. I'll be back for the closing session as soon as possible. Thank you very much. I will thank all the speakers.
Well, I'm really honored to be moderating this session. And the first keynote speaker of this session of Reinherit, Peace and Security and Sustainability topic is Peter Stone, who is the president of the Blue Shield. So, Mr. Stone, I give you the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'm afraid, A, for starting 50 odd minutes late, but B, for not beginning this last session on a more positive note. Okay, so I'm talking about, as you see, cultural property, a two-edged sword in relation to peace and conflict. Before I'm allowed to do that, I am obliged to tell you who I am, and predominantly because I am a UNESCO chair in cultural property protection and peace, the only such designation in the world. But the bit that I have to tell you is that means I am not paid for by UNESCO. I do not represent UNESCO, and nothing I say binds UNESCO in any way whatsoever. So quite right. Anyway, the best description of UNESCO chairs is that they are a critical friend to UNESCO in areas that UNESCO work in. And you will see perhaps why UNESCO think I may be on occasion overly critical towards the end of this presentation. But I am the president, as we've heard, of the Blue Shield, and I am allowed to talk for the Blue Shield. So the issue is the cultural property, heritage, whatever we want to call it, both natural and cultural, both tangible and intangible, is damaged during conflict and disaster, and there is, so the argument goes, nothing we can do about that. And I'm not going to read out all of these excuses, but you can see them there on the screen. They'll be available to you afterwards, and simply they are wrong. Okay, so cultural heritage and cultural property can be protected if that value of cultural property heritage is recognised in peacetime, so that the necessary partnerships and trust is developed in peacetime between what you will hear me talk about of three sectors. So not only does this have to be across government responsibility, but it has to be across sectorial responsibility between the heritage sector, what we call the uniform sector, so not only the armed forces, but border and customs control, the police and other emergency services, and the humanitarian sector. And I'll come back to that in a few slides. But why is cultural property important? And we all know that. It gives us the tangible and intangible links to give us a sense of place, a sense of identity, a sense of belonging, and a sense of dignity. But of course, we should always protect people before we protect their cultural property. But my argument is that the protection of people is indivisibly intertwined with the protection of their cultural property. So we know all of that, and we know in Blue Shield language why we do it. In Blue Shield language, it is to create healthy, peaceful, stable, secure, sustainable communities, because on those communities can be built peaceful society, and that's what we're trying to achieve. But the other side of cultural property is that it needs a health warning. It doesn't just be a beneficial possibility of peace or reconciliation. It identifies who belongs and who doesn't, who is included and who is excluded. And just as often as it is used as a mechanism of peace and reconciliation, it can be used and has been used, and there are a couple of examples on the screen, as an excuse for conflict, as a weapon in conflict, and as a target in conflict. And as cultural heritage professionals, we need to be aware of both sides of that issue. None of that is new. it goes back at least 2,500 years to Sun Shao in 6th century BC China. But I haven't got time to talk about the whole history of CPP. But I'm going to just focus in on the period immediately following the Second World War. Because the international community, who had by that stage just lived through 2 world wars, had been appalled initially at the failure of the royal families of Europe to stop, either before it began or before Christmas, the First World War. Okay? And as a result, many of those royal families disappeared from the map. And they were replaced by an international organisation called the League of Nations. The League of Nations was there to create world peace, and overly simplistically, to create world peace through diplomacy, through economics, and through an overall reduction in armaments. At its height, the League only had 58 countries, and very few of the major military powers subscribed to the League. And so, unsurprisingly, the League failed to stop the Second World War. In the discussions about that failure in the latter years of that Second World War, the international community realised that they had missed a key element from the work of the League, and that was that the aspiration for world peace needed to be based on humanity's moral and intellectual solidarity. And then you have the very famous first words of the UNESCO Constitution, that since wars begin in the minds of men, it is in the minds of men that the defences of peace must be constructed. And that's what the UN was about, and that's what its primary agency for peace was about, the UN's Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organisation. Those are the first words of its constitution. Now, the UN created in 45, but a lot of the thinking behind the UN and some of the other things on the slide was done by one man, a man called Rafał Lemkin, a Polish lawyer, a Jew who escaped Poland just in time. The majority of the rest of his family were killed in the camps. But Lemkin had already been investigating large-scale massacres of people in the past. And he was so appalled at some of these that he was driven to create a new word. And he invented a word, and that word was genocide. He put a Latin word and a Greek word together and came up with genocide, the destruction of people. But in his first drafts of the 48 Genocide Convention, Lemkin had 2 versions of genocide. Barbarism, genocide against people. But also, in chapter 3, vandalism, genocide against their cultural property. And vandalism, in Lemkin's mind, nearly always preceded barbarism, and could be seen as an indicator that barbarism was about to happen unless the community did something about it. Now, actually, in the final discussions and votes on the Genocide Convention, Chapter 3 was taken out at the insistence of the so-called settler states, America, Canada, New Zealand and Australia, supported, great, thank you, isn't it wonderful being British, by the UK at that time, okay, because they all thought that it might be used retrospectively and in a contemporary way for their treatment of their respective indigenous communities. So it wasn't put into the Genocide Convention, but senior Nazis at the Nuremberg trials were convicted for both crimes of barbarism and vandalism, as Lemkin would have described them. It's there in the Article 27 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, access to culture, and by implication, so all the lawyers tell us, cultural property is a universal human right. And it was there in the drafting of the 1954 Hague Convention on the protection of cultural property in the event of armed conflict. And the then Director General, opening the last session of the drafting of that convention said, gentlemen, and everybody in the room was a gentleman at the time, so gentlemen, I remind you that we are not only here to write the text of a new convention, but to create a new organisation, the Red Cross for Cultural Property. Those were his words. And over the next 3 months, the people who were doing the hard work in the committee rooms came up with the concept that that would be called the Blue and White Shield, after a doodle by a Polish professor during the discussion. And you can see why in the right-hand corner, the Blue and White Shield, which is also on my lapel. So those who drafted the convention fully expected the Blue and White Shield to be created in 1954 or 1955. Actually, it took another 42 years. And it was created by the 4 main international heritage organisations for museums, for monuments and sites, for libraries and archives. It's an independent, impartial, neutral organisation, not for profit, which is very lucky because we have no money at all, and established originally in 1996. Currently, it has 32 national committees with about another 12 or 14 under some form of preparation. So we're growing fairly quickly, and we're known by this as there. And again, I go back to our language: healthy, peaceful, stable, secure, sustainable communities, because it's on those that we can build societal and international peace. And we envisage the Blue Shield as a triangle within a circle. Sounds a bit naff, but there's a logic to it. So the 3 points of the triangle are those 3 sectors: heritage, humanitarian, and uniformed. And as put to me by a colonel in the US Marine Corps recently, well, a couple of years ago now, he said, "Oh, I get it, sir. The space in the triangle is where there are no stupid questions." And he got it in one, absolutely, because those 3 sectors have nothing in common when you see them at the outset. But actually, they all have something in common. In Blue Shield language, those healthy, peaceful, etc. communities, because that's what the military want, that's what the police want, that's what border forces want, that's what the humanitarian community want. But to get there, we have to think about why it's important to the 3 sectors. I first got involved with the military in 2003. For the next 8 years, because I'm a very slow learner, I got it completely wrong. And I would go to the military and say, this is one of the most important archaeological sites, or museums, or libraries, or archives, or whatever, and you must protect it. And they would look at me and say, yeah, we get that it's a really important thing, but why should we protect it? That's got nothing with us winning the battle or winning the war. It means nothing to us. So 8 years too late, I realised I had to learn another language, which was military. And I had to learn military speak. So that most important museum didn't remain the most important museum. It began to be an important potential force multiplier, something that could make their end mission more achievable, more quickly, with less casualties. And as soon as you started saying that, they looked at me aghast and said, why didn't you say that 8 years ago? And I have been saying that for 8 years. Anyway, that's what goes on in the triangle. But the triangle can't talk to each other, it can't have those stupid questions, unless we understand what goes in the circle around us. Because the political context is the political context that we are going to try and use cultural property for peace, or is it why one side or more than one side have gone into conflict in the first place? Is cultural property going to be specifically targeted? Is it going to be used as a weapon? The military and the humanitarians need to know the answers to that if they're going to work effectively during that conflict. They need to know the legal situation. What legal conventions, and there are a whole raft of them, not just under international humanitarian law, but under international criminal law, international customary law, that to a greater or lesser extent, everybody involved in a conflict, be they state against state or state against armed non-state actor, as they're called, have to abide by. But each conflict is different because the makeup of each conflict is different. So you need to know that legal situation. And you also need to know the media situation. And what's the media situation? So the media situation is a critical one because if you get that wrong, you cause all sorts of problems. And very simplistically, in 2002, the international community preparing for the invasion of Iraq and the taking away of Saddam Hussein created 6 so-called think tanks in America, one of which had a subcommittee on the whole of culture, which I am reliably told never met. As a result, there was no political thinking about culture and the importance of culture and cultural property protection. As a result, that importance wasn't passed to the military, and as a result, no troops in the coalition were given responsibility to protect any culture. As a result, the National Museum was looted, the National Library, the National Archive, and thousands, if not tens of thousands, archaeological sites across the country, all were looted. As time went on, as we got to 2006, the Iraqi population were increasingly bemused and fed up with the fact that coalition troops were still on Iraqi streets. And at the same time, others were trying to escalate the problem. And what most commentators on the conflict identify as the tipping point from a belligerent society to full-scale sectarian civil war was the destruction of the third holiest shrine in Shia Islam, the Al-Aqshari Mosque in Samarra. And the blowing up of the Al-Aqshari Mosque meant that in Western political minds, the troops had to stay for a further 5 years, taking 5 years worth of casualties, 5 years worth of fatalities, but I would argue, and I think it's a harsh thing to say, more importantly, 5 years worth of losing the media war, because losing that war allowed for the re-emergence of Al-Qaeda in Iraq and provided the oxygen for the emergence of Daesh. And Daesh is not going anywhere for the next 50 years or more. And just as an appalling aside, Daesh hasn't gone away in the Middle East. It still controls large swathes of territory in the Middle East. And at the last count, or estimation, there were still over 2,000 Yazidi women and girls in sexual slavery in those areas still controlled by Daesh. So that's why the media context is so important, and we might get it wrong. It's there in post-conflict stabilization, the rebuilding of mosques and churches and others, the reuse of jails, so the image at the bottom, the reuse of Robben Island, and in Mandela's words, visiting Robben Island should provide, this is not a museum to hatred, visiting Robben Island should provide a lesson in reconciliation. Now, using heritage like that and cultural property in those sorts of instances is a very long timescale, but that's where we're at. We need to integrate, we at the moment in this heritage bubble, the UNESCO wording. But the last quote there, no one was prepared for a war of this magnitude, so it was improvised. A Ukrainian colleague. We hadn't thought about it in peacetime, therefore nothing was going to happen in post-conflict. And I just want to, for the last 2 or 3 slides, mention UNESCO. Okay? Created in 1945 to bring world peace through education, science and culture. Here are its global priorities. Okay? You may notice that there is one word missing from those. That word, peace. UNESCO has 6 cultural conventions. The word peace appears once in one of them. Okay? Not a great emphasis on its primary function. The most successful UNESCO convention is the 1972 World Heritage Convention, now with 1,199 World Heritage sites. This is a whole different lecture, but I'm just going to leave you with this thought. Why aren't those 1,199 ambassadors for peace? Everybody who visits those sites should go away thinking about how heritage can be used for peace. At the moment, in the probably 1,196 of them, nobody does that at all. That's the challenge. There is some hope on the horizon. Those people in the image are student volunteers following the explosion at the port in Beirut in 2020. And we worked very closely with the Lebanese Armed Forces, with the Director General of Antiquities, with Blue Shield, and with the UN peacekeeping deployment with those students to save some of the heritage of Beirut following that explosion. None of that would have happened had we not been working with all of those organizations for the previous 7 years, training them, developing partnership, developing trust. And it was not the heritage community that phoned either the humanitarians or the uniform sector. It was UNIFIL who phoned us and said, we've got permission to come out of our area of responsibility, how can we help? That's what we need to embed. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this enlightening speech. I have noted some keywords: trust.
Yes.
And the fact that, of course, you'll take your watch because you'll be looking for that later. So the challenge is what we are supposed to do during peacetime. Because as we say, prevention is better than cure, and we tend to forget that. So talking about prevention and conflicts and challenges, I'll move on to Mrs. Aparna Tandon from ICROM. She is a senior program leader for the First Aid and Resilience for Cultural Heritage in Times of Crisis program. Unfortunately, she's not here with us today because she got sick yesterday and she didn't manage to travel, but we have her online. And thank you very much for being here with us, Ms. Tandon.
Thank you so much. I hope you can hear me, and I'm so sorry, my voices are still a little difficult. But I would like to thank the organizers, the Blue Shield Committee and of the National Committee of Greece, and also the Reinherit initiative for this conference. I've been following it since morning. Great discussions, and the last speech by Peter Stone was very inspiring. And I would like to especially thank Katerina for all the help she extended to me in making sure that I could come, but unfortunately I can't be with you. So with that, I will start sharing my screen and start my presentation. I'm going to speak about managing overlapping risks of disasters and conflicts to heritage, and the efforts that ICROM is making in this regard through its First Aid and Resilience for Cultural Heritage in Times of Crisis program, the program that I lead at ICROM. So I'd like to begin with what other speakers have said. We are really living in the age of polycrisis, where impacts of climate change are causing existing hazard events to become more intense and occur with greater frequency. These impacts combine with other risks and threats such as conflicts, epidemics, or inflation, creating compound crises threatening lives, livelihoods, and cultures. Another risk multiplying factor is conflict. Overt conflict, ongoing armed conflict, all forms of conflict make a country more susceptible to natural hazards. And this is a report of World Bank which says that more than half of the people impacted by natural hazard events live in fragile or conflict-affected states. Libya, Kosovo, and Libya, Bosnia, Kosovo, Bosnia and Herzegovina in the Balkans are some of the direct examples. And Libya, of course, we have just seen the floods in Libya and how they have devastated the entire country. So here comes First Aid and Resilience for Cultural Heritage in Times of Crisis program, which is a flagship capacity development program of ICROM, working at the nexus of disasters, conflicts, and the climate crisis. It is purpose-built to safeguard heritage from overlapping and cascading risks. While a lot of important work is going on to protect heritage in the face of changing climate, intensifying disasters, and rising conflicts, it is our approach that sets us apart, moving away from authorized discourse of cultural heritage. We are developing tools and trainings to position heritage safeguard as a socio-cultural process that can help communities and governments to understand systemic nature of risk and address root causes of disasters and conflicts in a place, considering all possible risk drivers such as climate change, as well as understand how culture is contributing to some of the inequalities. Therefore, through our activities, we aim to reduce disaster and conflict risk for heritage, enhance preparedness for its safeguard during a complex emergency, and leverage this work to promote peace and contribute to climate action. Participation, prevention, forecasting, and interagency coordination are therefore some of the pillars of on which we rest our programs, and these are the principles as well as programmatic orientations for us. We prioritize risk-prone regions and countries for our programs, and some of the services we offer include international and regional courses that cover both disasters and conflict, and now will also include a module on on climate risks. We undertake on-demand courses and help build national teams of cultural first aiders. We also develop disaster risk management plans for different types of heritage, such as archives, museums, heritage sites, as well as intangible heritage. We offer a range of long and short courses on disaster risk management, which are international in scope, and we are trying our best to provide concrete evidence of how risk management pays in the end, and that means we work with governments very closely. Our projects are based on, our network is spanning 122 countries, and we are not just a few people in the Secretariat of ICROM, but it's the network that is built on 10 years of previous first aid training, and we are engineers, economists, climate scientists, conservators, ecologists, and really it's a vibrant and robust network which also allows us to offer in-crisis assistance to our member states. Our projects are based on a people-led cascading capacity development approach, where our trainees become our change agents and go directly down to the grassroots level to effectively change conditions for safeguard and upkeep of heritage, while also engaging local communities and governments. And one such example is Alliance for Cultural First Aid, Peace and Resilience, a 30-month cascading capacity development project that we undertook with, in partnership with Ali Foundation, the Center for Security Studies, and Egyptian Heritage Rescue Foundation. Our key goal here was to work in countries in MENAP region, which included Afghanistan and Pakistan, which are suffering from cyclic conflicts and are also exposed to natural hazard events as well as epidemics, repeated epidemics. In this project, we trained 20 cultural first aiders who in turn, through 16 field projects, trained 262 other professionals in their respective countries. In order to work in this region, one of the major aspects was to give tools to professionals, heritage professionals, so that they can engage and work with other sectors like the humanitarian aid sector, their local governments, to understand cultural drivers of risk and to assess when to intervene in an ongoing conflict situation, because as I think speaker after speaker here has outlined, that heritage is a double-edged sword, and sometimes heritage can also incite conflicts. So we really have to understand in an ongoing conflict or a protracted conflict situation when to intervene and how to intervene, which communities to engage with, which actors to engage with, and to how to maximize the peaceful outcomes of heritage recovery processes. So one such tool is PATH, which is Peace Building Assessment Tool for Heritage Recovery and Rehabilitation, which we developed with the help of the government of Principality of Monaco and the Swedish Coast Code Foundation, as well as the Allen Foundation helped us in translating this tool. And this is a very simple self-help tool where any site can be used to, we can use it, it's a conflict analysis tool, and any person who is working on a particular site can use this tool to understand and evaluate the conflict risk of heritage intervention at that site. Similarly, a sequel to this, this is how do we measure? So, okay, fine, we say that heritage helps us to achieve peaceful outcomes. But how do we measure or evaluate peace? What does peace look like in actual practice beyond the the high-level agreements, peace agreements that governments or countries enter into? So a sequel to this is this community-based heritage indicators of peace. This tool it helps to evaluate peacefulness in a society based on people's attitudes and behaviors regarding heritage. This tool is an extension of Dr. Roger McGinty's work on community-based peace indicators, and it enables communities to voice their ideas of peace, which can guide confidence-building measures. For example, this picture says it all. For some time ago, women in Afghanistan were able to stand in front of monuments and get a selfie. Getting a selfie in front of a monument is a matter of personal freedom, and people should be able to enjoy. And we've been talking all about cultural rights, but what do these rights actually mean in practice, in everyday sense? And that is, being able to take a selfie is a freedom, is a cultural right, but it's also a notion of peace. It's an indicator of peace, and this is what we need to restore when we are working to safeguard heritage. The relationships or the freedoms or the uses people have for heritage and how they can enjoy these uses. So we have to restore these which are broken in a conflict situation, and this tool helps you to bring it out, break it down in, see it from a everyday perspective, everyday use perspective. Similarly, another tool that we developed for mounting this training was, or before, like this was a tool which was a result of a field research, a field project, and this is called Participatory Vulnerability and Capacity Assessment Tool. It's essential to understand knowledge and strengths that heritage imparts for reducing risk of disasters or conflicts, and enhancing adaptive capacities and building social cohesion. We tested this tool in Racha, which is a border province of Georgia, which is prone to landslides but is also threatened by neighboring Russia. And so this tool actually assists governments and local communities in mapping heritage-related vulnerabilities. And at the same time, it allows us to understand which strengths come from heritage and which allow a community to persist and build resilience. So this is available in multiple languages, including Arabic, and was used extensively during the training or post-training field projects that participants carried out, and it helped inform their actions, subsequent actions. In order to maximize impacts and benefits of the training, we also translated our First Aid to Cultural Heritage in Times of Crisis handbook and toolkit into Arabic and developed specific content for managing secondary risks during the COVID pandemic. This guidance now exists in more than 18 languages, and similarly, our emergency evacuation guidelines for heritage collection also was translated, was already existed in Arabic, and it really helped in ensuring that there is a body of knowledge and tools available for professionals in the MENAP region to take some of the key concepts of the training and implement them in their daily practice. As a result of this Alliance for Peace, Cultural First Aid and Resilience training, 600 citizens were engaged, and emergency preparedness was enhanced at 7 World Heritage Sites in the MENAP region. This included training in Pakistan, where 2 World Heritage Sites, Makki and Mohenjo-daro, there were groups of volunteers prepared, and when the flood hit Pakistan last year, no, I think it was, yes, last year, 2022, the teams were prepared, and they were able to activate emergency response, and at the same time, efforts in these sites have helped to minimize people heritage conflicts, because in both sides, at both sites, such conflicts exist, partly because of the Mohenjo-daro site is an non-Islamic site, and there are issues regarding identity and other conflicts exist regarding the use of the site. One of the post-training field projects which was very useful was in Yemen, where poems or poetry, traditional music was, cassettes and tapes were digitized and put in a dark archive, because Houthis have issued a ban for they have banned poetry and recitation of poetry and songs during cultural festivals and social gatherings, and this was very important to one of the participants. So this has now, and this project was done in collaboration with the communities, local communities in the region, in the Hama region of Yemen, and it also had a component of intergenerational transfer, and we think it was a very important project, which actually helped to reinstate some of the cultural rights of these people. Similarly, another post-training field project was carried out in South Sudan, where traditional dances, songs, and ceremonies of the Mahdi community were documented, and Mahdi community enjoys a special status and is known traditionally as a connecting community that has helped to build peace and restore inter-communal harmony. So this work was again another way of reinstating peace and contributing to confidence building in South Sudan. Another post-training field project on the similar lines. So this is in addition to all the physical projects that were carried out to restore, to stabilize buildings. In Iraq, Mosulvi songs were recorded, digitized, and these are songs that are enjoyed by all sections of society. And again, it was an intercommunal project, and now the songs are accessible through a phone and web-based application. A very important field project was in response to the emergency that occurred during the implementation of the project, the capacity development project, was that when Taliban took over Afghanistan, a storage, an archaeological storage on the Bamiyan site was looted, and we gave training online to young archaeologists as well as volunteers in Afghanistan, who then carried out a very top secret mission, and they went and salvaged the remains of the looted storage and transferred the remaining objects to a storage location that was identified in collaboration with UNESCO. All these success stories are captured in our Story of Change publication of this project, and we have other such projects, and this is like a third publication in the series, and this actually gives concrete evidence of how our trainings are making positive change and giving us an effective feedback loop. One of the key challenges for protecting heritage in areas of conflict and disasters is that we do not have data on loss and damage of cultural heritage. It is inconsistent, insufficient, and this is our ability to prevent future damage, and our responses are ad hoc. To counter this, to take on board the lack of consistent damage and risk data, we have developed systematic damage and risk assessment forms for movable, immovable, and intangible heritage, which we make context specific according to the emergency, and we have field tested them in 17 countries. And to make data collection easy for member states, we have developed an open source application which will allow anyone who is using the app to set up their own server and store data as well as incorporate it into their existing systems. Digital sustainability was our key concern while designing this application, and that is why we chose to base it on an open source technology. Our end goal is that each member state, as part of their preparedness, develops context-specific forms and has a system in place to gather data. So if Blue Shield Greece, the National Committee, has not developed damage and risk assessment forms or would like to get access to this mobile application, we will be very happy to share this application. You can create your own deployment, you can store your own data, but I think it's a very important preparedness part which every country must have and should be done ahead of the disaster, not during the disaster. To carry on this work further, we are undertaking training in Ukraine, where we have developed, we have translated some of our tools into Ukrainian. We've held in-person trainings, and we have also conducted a joint assessment mission. We are developing a risk map for heritage in Ukraine, and our capacity development there consists of damage and risk assessment, emergency preparedness, risk reduction, and first aid to cultural heritage. We have trained until now 305 professionals, but we are doing this work with European Union, the European Commission, the Ambassadors Fund for Cultural Preservation from the US government, as well as UNESCO. We have also carried out crisis response and risk management workshops for Sudan, and we have helped them to analyze the situation, mount damage and risk assessment, and develop an action plan. And similar efforts are underway for Libya and Morocco. I would like to highlight that a very key aspect of our training is scenario-based learning. We do risk modeling, and that means interagency coordination through joint training. So we work with civil protection, disaster risk management agencies, as well as climate change meteorologists and climate change scientists, to factor in the influence of climate on extreme hazard events, but also understand better how heritage might be involved at a city or a regional level in an extreme event, and what kind of help would be available in case of a disaster or in case of a conflict. Forthcoming is a climate risk management tool for all types of heritage, which we hope will help everyone to understand what kind of climate data they need to gather locally, and what kind of climate data is available in open source through open source tools, and how that can be factored into their existing risk management plans. This tool is part of our ongoing project called Net Zero Heritage for Climate Action, where we are cross-linking science with culture. One aspect is protecting heritage from climate-related disasters and conflicts, and the second aspect of this project is trying to understand how knowledge embedded in heritage and culture can be used to develop climate change adaptation, as well as decarbonization strategies. With that, I thank you for your attention. I'm sorry, I'm not in my best of my health, and so if you didn't understand me, let me know. I'm here for questions. Thank you.
I'd like to thank Mrs. Tandem for this very interesting and elaborate presentation on so many significant and multifaceted projects that Chrome runs right now, not only right now, has run. And it seems to me that one cannot emphasize enough on the fact that the key is education and training of professionals. Now I'd like to move on to our next speaker, Mrs. Wisnia Kisic, who's a member of the advisory panel of the 7 Most Endangered program of Europa Nostra. Mrs. Kisic is going to talk to us about practicing transnational solidarity amidst endangerment, insights from the 7 Most Endangered program. I give the floor to Ms. Wisnia Kisic. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone. I would just like to check, do we hear each other well, or do you hear me well?
Yes.
Of course.
Perfect. Okay, so I can proceed with sharing my presentation, right? It is actually quite a coincidence that this panel is happening in the middle of our journey for the new round of 7 Most Endangered program for 2024. And that actually we have been just today in the middle of kind of debating and presenting the sites, and then tomorrow voting for those who will be shortlisted and eventually put on the 7 Most Endangered program. So for me personally, the topic of heritage and reconciliation has been quite an important one. Growing up in the Balkans and being a heritage professional, I have dedicated part of my career especially to heritage and reconciliation efforts in the Western Balkans in post-Yugoslav context, and really focused on heritage dissonance and how do we govern heritage dissonance for peace building and reconciliation. But that is not going to be the topic of my presentation today, because today I'm going to be talking about what it means to be practicing solidarity, and especially transnational solidarity when it comes to heritage endangered. And the invitation came for talking about 7 Most Endangered program, which Europa Nostra has been implementing since 2013. So it is just in few days that we are celebrating the 10th anniversary of this program, which has its many achievements and has at the same time its many challenges, as you will see from the presentation. But basically, to start with, it's important to kind of underline what Europa Nostra is. It is the biggest civil society platform in Europe dedicated to safeguarding cultural heritage and sees itself as the voice of cultural heritage, and especially the voice of civil society in Europe related to heritage. That is quite a particular thing because Europa Nostra has had, in terms of its European scope of action, several very distinct features. One is always being about civil society and this relationship between civil society and public, and especially the kind of policies and lobbying on European level. Nowadays, that means EU institutions, but in the early days of Europa Nostra existence, more than 50 years ago, it was about Council of Europe, and this kind of Council of Europe perspective and scope of seeing Europe as being from the UK all the way to Caucasus and Russia has been an important part for Europa Nostra's work. So it is trying to constantly influence governments, foundations, EU institutions on the importance of cultural heritage, not only in cultural policy area, but also in the areas of agriculture.
Could we please meet
Also in the area of agriculture, urban planning, mobility and trade, regional development, and now increasingly climate change as well. Europa Nostra has also been dedicating its last 30 years to kind of see and map and research what are the projects of excellence on the European level. And through the European Union Prize for Cultural Heritage and Europa Nostra Awards, actually award, put a spotlight, and enhance those good examples or excellent examples that heritage professionals around Europe are implementing. It's also been quite important for Europa Nostra that it recognizes and highly values civic engagement, and it's a network of civil society associations in the field of cultural heritage, doing a lot of promotion of volunteering in heritage, of citizen engagement and awareness raising and activism in the field of heritage. And because that has been so for decades, but there never has been a really kind of overarching platform for how Europa Nostra intervenes when heritage is endangered. In 2013, this 7 Most Endangered program has been established in partnership with the Institute of European Investment Bank in order to kind of tackle endangered heritage in Europe in a more strategic level. How does the program itself work? So as I said, it was founded 10 years ago after many involvements of Europa Nostra in different activities, lobbying, advocacy, campaigning against endangering of heritage in different European towns and landscapes and places. It was founded in partnership with the European Investment Bank Institute. That partnership is still ongoing, and it's a crucial kind of partnership, not only in terms of funding, but very much in terms of expertise that both organizations are bringing to the program. It acts to mobilize on transnational level forces, knowledge, media attention, and to raise awareness, and thus act to kind of counteract the threat on heritage sites in Europe and the threats that they are facing. Those threats vary kind of widely, from threats related to improper urban development and kind of investors-based urban development that we are seeing increasingly all around Europe. It also relates to natural disasters, earthquakes, floods, and consequences of those. Sometimes it is about neglect and not long-term neglect and the lack of maintenance, but sometimes it is also about conflicts and kind of identity politics between different actors within a nation state or between two nation states that are actually impeding or threatening the heritage protection. So far, there has been 56 sites around Europe listed as 7 most endangered in 31 countries. As you could tell, the program is not targeting per se heritage that is part of the conflict or post-conflict areas, and is not related to reconciliation, heritage-based reconciliation as such, but kind of covers the much wider scale of threats related to heritage. But it is also an agile program in which, for example, as soon as the Russian invasion in Ukraine has started, Ukrainian heritage as a whole has been declared as a heritage endangered. Venice, due to the climate change, has been declared as the most endangered heritage site in Europe back in 2016. Now there is quite an effort to organize a mission and also advocacy campaign related to Nagorno-Karabakh's heritage, and to access and inspect what is going on there. Some of the key steps of the process, so every spring there is a nomination process going on, where members of Europe and Austria, member organizations, country representations, and associates could nominate the site that is endangered in their own country. Then there is an advisory panel board gathering consisting of almost 20 professionals from different European countries and different backgrounds, both from members of Europe and Austria and members of the Institute of European Investment Bank. And they're doing the evaluations and making decisions basically based on the 3 criteria. Does the site have a European significance and European value? Does it have kind of tells a European story in one way or another? Then is the site really endangered? And the third one, is there a possibility for action? Is there already local actions taking place, local campaigns and attempts taking place? And what would this kind of transnational involvement and European involvement mean and contribute in every single case? After that, usually 14 or a bit less sites are shortlisted, and that shortlisting gives time, a few months' time, for local nominators to campaign, for Europe and Austria panel members and boards to actually campaign on the local level for the improvement of the position of those heritage sites. And even in that period, some progress can take place, especially for the sites where kind of additional campaigning and lobbying is really crucial to success, or to kind of decrease the threat. But then 7 most endangered sites are announced every year around May, with a large media campaign, both on national and local levels, as well as on European level. After that, there is an intense process of meetings and collaborations between the nominators in every single country and the representatives of the mission. It is usually 2 to 3 people from Europe and Austria expert panel, and also 2 people from European Institute of European Investment Bank. They're planning the missions, meeting with all stakeholders, making sure to kind of cover all the possible details and perspectives and segments of both threat and potential solutions. We're coming up with an independent report and with the recommendations for action. And since 2010, there is also this funding related to kind of local support for local campaign. After that, what happens is a long-term monitoring. So it is not the case that each site has just a 1-year-long attention, but actually there are many sites in which progress is not so progress has been okay, but the situation hasn't been solved. So Europe and Austria and the Institute of European Investment Bank are still monitoring those sites, still helping out, are still in the contact with the local stakeholders. So basically, the contribution and support that the program gives is mostly about awareness raising and advocacy, raising visibility on European level. And in many cases, that is something that really pushes kind of local authorities and local administrations to change their mind, especially when it comes to monuments that they wanted to tear down, or when it comes to mobilizing a wider kind of spectrum of stakeholders and find funds for the restoration or conservation works. So far, 20% of the projects, we could say, have been really successfully completed and are not anymore on the list of kind of worries and monitoring. 50% of them have good or medium progress. Those are the sites which we are still monitoring, in which there is kind of restoration or conservation works ongoing, management plans being made, rehabilitation plans being made, and so on. And there's only 3 failed projects so far. Failed in terms of the monuments have been torn down. All of 3 cases are the cases in which actually it's a kind of urban planning issues and new investments going on due to which heritage hasn't been protected. And the action of Europe and Austria and listing wasn't enough to support the local actions against the destruction of this heritage. Here you see just a glimpse of kind of the scheme which was developed 2 years ago in order to kind of assess what has been the progress so far. There's basically on one hand the diversity of kind of heritage and how complex it is, basically from one building to whole islands in Greece or a series of islands in the Aegean, for example, but also main reasons for endangerment. And as I mentioned, most of them are endangered because of neglect, but then there are quite some endangered because of so-called planning dangers or urban planning. And then there are many that are really about advocacy and kind of changing the political visions around heritage. There's also some that in which kind of the need for funding is really crucial, and that is where the Institute of European Investment Bank is joining forces with Europe and Austria and local stakeholders to find new funds or to use these 10,000 euros of funding in order to produce documents and projects which then can serve as application for funding. In some it is important, but it's not crucial. And then in some funding is really less relevant, especially when it comes to urban planning, endangerment, and advocacy projects. And maybe just to focus a bit more on kind of what does this sort of European-wide or transnational involvement means in when particular heritage is in question, and what does this program brings that maybe other programs don't. Here 2 years ago, you see there is one of the 7 most endangered sites has been the Echeni Monastery in Kosovo. Kosovo, which is still a disputed territory internationally and between Serbia and the Republic of Kosovo, which claimed its independence in 2008. But since then, actually since 2003, these monasteries in Kosovo have been endangered. They've been listed as UNESCO World Heritage Sites endangered, and they have been guarded by the KFOR in Kosovo. However, there are certain limits to what UNESCO inscription for heritage endangered can do. especially because it acts within the framework of kind of international or intergovernmental relations. And intergovernmental relations are really kind of powerful when we talk about kind of state actions and interstate actions, but when there is a conflict between two states, and when especially one state is kind of not recognizing the other, and the other state does not have a seat in UNESCO, there are so many conflicts that can't be solved on that level. So in that sense, what Europa Nostra has as a kind of as a power that it brings is that it is not constituted of experts representing their nation states or national governments, but is actually kind of a group of independent experts trying to safeguard European heritage, coming with a message of mediation of conflict, coming with an ear for different stakeholders and different stakeholders' perspectives, and always having in mind that heritage is multi-layered, and this multi-layeredness has to be protected. At the same time, that also gives kind of sometimes a new impetus for kind of pushing forward to new legal kind of recognitions, in this case of the monastery of Dejani, kind of the decision to implement the returning of the property and kind of the surrounding cultural landscape to Dejani monastery, or to prohibit and push Kosovo authorities to not construct a highway going next to the monastery. The second case I wanted to discuss, and I will end with that, and then we can have some time for questions, is heritage that is deemed dissonant. And there has been many examples throughout the years of that, especially when it comes to Eastern Europe and Southeast Europe. Years ago, Bodluja monument near Sofia in Bulgaria has been designated. It was threatened to be destroyed because it is a monument dating from the communist regime. Statue memorial in Budapest has been designated last year as well. And last year in 2003, the Partizan Cemetery in Mostar in Bosnia and Herzegovina has been among the 7 most endangered sites. It's a pearl of Yugoslav architecture, especially memorial architecture, but it has been a subject to vandalism on several occasions, and most recently in 2002 and 3, basically almost all the kind of plaques and gravestones have been vandalized. And it is very hard to find a common language in a city that has been through such a conflict and destruction such as Mostar, and in which you still have 3 ethnic groups who are running the city and living in the city, but not really have not integrated as a community, and there are still kind of walls and hatred and lack of communication existing between them. So having Europa Nostra and European experts coming in to negotiate, to mediate, and to find a solution, and especially to come with this message that this is not just a matter of who appreciates or is for Yugoslav history and who isn't, but that this is a kind of testament of a particular and valuable part of Yugoslav, but also European heritage that should be safeguarded. Those messages of solidarity are really important, in which it's not only locals who are concerned and who care for local heritage, but it kind of they are supported by the wider network of European professionals and institutions who care and kind of send a message of care to protect those heritage sites. And here I would end and stop to leave some time for the questions as well. And I thank you for your attention.
Okay, can I talk? Yes, okay, thank you. So thank you for this very informative presentation on the key steps and processes, as well as the criteria that the 7 most endangered panel takes into account. I wanted to ask a question, but I'll save it for later, concerning the agenda and the political vision. I won't do it right now, however. I'll move on to our next speaker, Mr. Eric Klein, who is head of library and archives department at the Cultural Heritage Agency in the Netherlands. And he's going to talk to us about cultural property protection as a curriculum subject for the military. The floor to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your kind introduction and also for your invitation.
Thank you.
I realize, dear audience, that at the end of this day there is some battle fatigue. That's inevitable. We have to embrace it and not to fight it, I think. But nevertheless, I hope you have some energy left to listen to my little contribution about the UNESCO Military Manual for Cultural Property Protection. So we are focusing on armed conflict and what the military's position is in this situation. I think speaking about armed conflict and cultural heritage is very relevant and also very urgent, because if we look at the world map of today, there are more than 100 armed conflicts right at this moment, and that is tremendous. That has a tremendous effect on our cultural heritage, the cultural heritage of mankind. Now, this is a map of Wikipedia, just giving an image of mortality, because that is one of the indicators of armed conflict. But of course, you could have, instead of mortalities, damaged cultural heritage also. So here we have one of the recent attacks that happened on the Transfiguration Cathedral in Ukraine on the 23rd of July of this year. And in many of these conflicts, aggression towards cultural heritage is premeditated, intentional and systemic. And mostly, heritage is targeted because of certain religious and ideological convictions of the aggressor. But sometimes it's destroyed as a means of mass psychological warfare and nothing more. It's to hit a population where it hurts most and to break its morale. And it's precisely for these reasons that international humanitarian law, or the law of armed conflict, as it's sometimes called, forbids any attack on cultural property in wars, and that offenders of this ruling are prone to prosecution for war crimes. Up to now, however, perpetrators are seldom ever get imprisoned. Of course, you're all familiar with the blue shield emblem and the UNESCO treaties that it stems from. They have been mentioned several times today. Also, the two protocols to it are very important, and especially the protocol, the second protocol of 1999, because it's a kind of revision and turning into more effect of the original convention. I think the convention and the other treaties are quite successful in the sense that 134 countries have signed and ratified this convention, and it's still a growing number, also due to the present state of security in the world. But of course, ratification is one thing, but the overall success should be measured looking at in how far states are really complying with it. So are they following up the rules? Well, states remain responsible for the implementation of the Convention's provisions and for those of the two protocols, but we see all too often that even basic principles of international humanitarian law are being set aside in wartime, and we can witness it now through the media in, for instance, Ukraine and Gaza. The armed forces of states are addressed specifically in the aforementioned treaties because of their pivotal role in protecting cultural heritage. It is the military in operations who make numerous decisions on how to go about with historical objects in their area of operation. It's they who have access to roads, railways and airspace. The military are often the first observers present in areas that have suffered badly under fire. And they start the big cleanup, and I mean with that the demining, the decontamination, the removal of arms and ammunition, etc., before civilians can continue their cleanup, the removing of rubble, the restoring of basic infrastructure, etc. Now, according to the manual, military protection can be done in many ways, both actively and passively, and mostly in close cooperation with civilian authorities, heritage institutions, and volunteers. For many armed forces around the world, cultural property protection, or CPP, as it's often referred to, Charlie Papa Papa in NATO alphabet, is a relatively new subject. And therefore, by way of introduction, UNESCO initiated and published in 2016 a manual in order to explain why and how the 1954 Hague Convention and its protocols were to be applied. The small booklet, it's only 90 pages, depending on the translation, was produced in cooperation with the San Remo Institute for International Humanitarian Law, with Professor Roger O'Keefe as editor-in-chief. It's a sort of rhyme, I believe. The UNESCO Cultural Property Protection Manual, written by lawyers, serves as a source of information for military legal advisors to commanders on matters of international humanitarian law. But it also informs military officers about restrictions imposed on them when they are operating in the field. The manual is also being used as a training tool, and training, as we have discovered today, is very important. The training tool is, one of the training tools is online available in many languages. NATO and a growing number of national armies have added the manual to their training curricula while teaching cultural property protection. And also a free online training course hosted by the USA-based Peace Operations Training Institute is available online. And the booklet is well known with staff and students of what I would like to call cultural emergency studies, management of cultural heritage in difficult or extreme circumstances. For instance, at Danube University in Krems, Austria, of course Newcastle University in the UK, or the Turin University in Italy. Now, of course, we have a rule set on the one hand, and we have the actual reality of the battlefield, I would like to call it, on the other hand. And it's a big challenge to close the gap. Looking at the military manual that we are talking about now, there is still a gap between these two ends of the spectrum. So I have a small recommendation for the development of manuals. The main message of the treaties can be summarized as damage prevention. Damage prevention is the key word, before, during and after hostilities and combat. Damage prevention not solely to important cultural property, but also to local communities, societies and humankind as a whole. Safeguarding cultural heritage will reduce human suffering and the risk of conflict, escalation and prolonging. Preparatory measures, as mentioned in the convention, are explained in the manual, and they should be taken well in advance of the outbreak of an armed conflict. That's a state's responsibility. States must make sure that within their armed forces, cultural specialists are appointed that promote respect for cultural heritage among the troops, and that military commanders are well advised in matters of protection of cultural heritage, so that their troops can be active protectors. If states have not yet installed CPP units, they can fall back on the expertise of other organizations. And of course Blue Shield is the first one that comes to mind. UNESCO, the OSCE, or the Smithsonian Institution in the United States. I mentioned just a few. Talking about training, this is an example Peter is most familiar with. You see him here in the center, where he, on behalf of Blue Shield, has trained the Irish military for the first time here, but for the third time, I understood, next week. So here we see an effort of an NGO really engaging with the military to at least try to learn them the basic principles of cultural property protection. These trainings are important, and we see them also. This is one I was involved in Lebanon in 2019, where UNESCO trained female military officers from the MENA region, including those of UNIFIL. UNIFIL was in the region, and the UNIFIL officers completed our invitees from countries like Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and not Syria, but Lebanon, of course. So we had a very special training, and it is to be repeated. This was on the World Heritage Site in southern Lebanon, within the mandate of UNIFIL. Recently, both the UK and the USA added CPP units to their armed forces. I myself had the privilege to serve as a military CPP officer in the Netherlands Army for many years. In the 1990s, I got involved in setting up a training in cultural awareness for troops on missions to Bosnia and the Middle East. But there was no manual as we have now, and we had to set up our trainings from scratch. Now let's have a look at what a manual points out about damage prevention before, during and after armed conflict. One of the preparatory measures could be the marking of the most important objects and sites with the blue shield. We saw earlier some examples of this. This would facilitate for the military the distinction between protected heritage and non-protected objects. And also, the manual underlines the importance of making inventories of protected property. Training the military in CPP and to instruct them prior to going on a mission is also advocated by the manual. And then, during combat, there's an overall prohibition of attacking any cultural heritage that does not qualify as a military objective at the moment of an attack. The military should not make use of any cultural site or historic building for their operations, since it would attract hostile fire. If a cultural object or historical site must be attacked because of imperative military necessity, then the method of attack and the choice of weaponry should cause minimal damage. And there should be no alternative to getting to a similar military advantage. After the ending of hostilities, perhaps I can show you from a Blue Shield report some years ago, I think 2011. 2011, thank you very much. So 12 years already. 12 years already. This is about a Roman fortress. It has been well documented by Blue Shield, which on its side had a mobile radar post with 5 or 6 vehicles standing there, and there was an operational choice, either to in military speak, neutralize the opponent by the Allied forces at that time with one big blast, you could say, sacrificing the historic monument, or with precision-guided weaponry, take out the vehicles, and the latter was rightfully chosen, thereby saving this important monument. So the choice of weaponry is one of the things that is mentioned in the military manual. Now, after the ending of hostilities, movable cultural objects or collections that were allocated to storage facilities elsewhere for safekeeping have to return to their places of origins once the hostilities have ended. Now, for reasons of time, I know this program is this conference is also about innovation. I wanted to explain two examples of recent developments, but I restrict myself just to mention them for reasons of time. So the first one is about conflict prediction, because if the manual and convention are all about prevention, it's very useful to know when to prepare. And conflict prediction is now a well-developed, I would say, a field of study globally, like here was done by Cornell and Purdue universities, where on the basis of some 5 million newspaper text, AI was applied on just analyzing subtleties, indicating the risk of war. Then the second example is satellite monitoring. Satellite monitoring has been an increasingly important tool. We see it here applied to specific regions of conflict or of risk, like in Nagorno-Karabakh, and another one is here in Ukraine, where the Smithsonian Institution, the University of Maryland, and the Virginia Museum of Natural History are working closely together to monitor all the attacks on Ukrainian territory, just for the sake of getting a good image and a comprehension of what is the toll of this armed conflict, but also to feed prosecutors and all the channels for justice with actual information or factual information, I'd like to say. So that is I think very important. Prosecutors are better placed to build legal cases. Offenders, of course, should be convicted in tribunals and courts of law, and war crimes should not left be unpunished. Because true justice, as we all know, will greatly contribute to sustainable peace and security in the world. To conclude, in the short time span of my presentation, I tried to explain a little about the UNESCO Cultural Property Protection Military Manual and the ever-changing context of this, I would say, remarkable publication. But of course, because of the gap between rule set and reality, other manuals are badly needed. Manuals that really speak to the military in their language. So they must be concise and illustrated. They must be solution-oriented and situation-sensitive. And they should use well-known symbols, abbreviations, adapted to military methods, procedures, and concepts. So I think if this is taken to heart, we'll have other additional manuals that are very fruitful to our end. I trust that the UNESCO manual will find its way to all functionaries within the Greek armed forces, and I hope it will contribute to a more sustainable peace in the world. Thank you for your attention.
Next President has a question. Ms. Pavlova.
Oh, okay,
So,
great. Yes, please. Thank you for your presentation. It was most interesting. It's been most interesting. Give me a second and we will go to Mrs. Tanton's question after your presentation, okay? When we finish the presentations, is that all right? Okay, could you please text her so that she knows? Thank you. And of course, I was very excited with the two examples of how innovation is used for cultural property protection. Now, last but not least, Mrs. Antonia Zervaki, General Secretary of the Reinherit Committee of the BS-GreekNationalCommittee and Professor at the National Capital District University, is going to talk to us about the cultural security sustainable development nexus. What role for Reinherit? Let's listen and find out.
First side, there is no role for Reinherit. Let's all go to dinner. This is not the
second side.
Just short comment about the Winter Manual. It was recently quite late translated into Greek, and the National Committee of the BS promotes its implementation, is an advocate of the military manual, of course. And we also, our President Elena Koper has participated in the NATO seminars we conducted. Actually, it's clear the International Center for the Training of the Military staff taking part in peacekeeping operations or peace enforcement operations as well in northern Greece, and Elena Koper has participated in the training, relevant training.
As did we.
Yes, exactly. So I will try to be brief. In the 2022 Monte Account Declaration, a broad consensus has been reached on the new impetus given to the role of culture for sustainable development, peace, and stability. The role of culture as a force for resilience, social inclusion and cohesion, environmental protection, and sustainable and inclusive growth. In order to achieve the above, the declaration refers to the sources of cultural insecurity that have to be addressed at the national, regional, and international levels, defines as threats to culture and its use for purposes which are likely to expose it to destruction or damage in the context of armed conflicts, which result in the intentional or collateral destruction of cultural heritage, in the acceleration of illicit trafficking of cultural property, and in the violation of human and cultural rights, including through discrimination, the disruption of leading cultural practices, and exacerbated vulnerability of cultural actors, institutions, sites, and markets. So instead of having this conference, we could distribute the declaration and then reflect. So it is evident that a new concept comes to the fore, a new concept emerges, that of cultural security based on the respect of diversity, which constitutes a crucial parameter for social resilience and social safety, both recognized as inherent elements of human security. Cultural security can be realized in conditions where peace and security, human rights protection, and sustainable development will exist. Ensuring cultural security entails processes of human empowerment as a condition for peace and development. human empowerment, a partner down referred to environment. Human empowerment founded on a delicate balance of cultural resilience and cultural adaptation within a given society. Cultural resilience has to do with the ability to mitigate threats to authentic cultural practices, expressions, and cultural spaces related to human environment in the sense of belongingness in a common historical and cultural continuum. Cultural adaptation is also related to human environment in a different way. The ability to negotiate one's identity, as well as the ability of a culture to safely grow and develop on its own accord, taking into account the societal dynamics and perceptions of progress or common interests, but also the impact of transnational dynamics such as globalization or migration. Drawing from the above, the nexus of cultural security of individuals and collectivities with sustainable development unravels the cultural potential in the process of sustaining peace in the following dimensions, which appear in Reinherit's philosophy, methodology, good practices, and technological tools, in Reinherit, a digital cultural heritage ecosystem. In terms of social sustainability, cultural security is perceived as an essential component of human development, where individual and collective human fulfillment goes in hand with social participation, inclusion, and social equity. This practically means addressing social injustice through the respect of cultural diversity and human rights. Reinherit functions as a prototype in terms of supporting museums and heritage sites to make use of digital solutions and technologies that place people first and open up new opportunities for engaging various audiences with cultural heritage in Europe and beyond. There is a special focus on the interaction with stakeholders, professionals, experts, general audience, following a bottom-up approach based on knowledge produced through co-creation and disseminated through participatory learning. Digital technology also provides a useful tool for the implementation of the right to access to cultural heritage and education, of course, reducing inequalities, and, of course, its structural causes, including discrimination and exclusion, often triggered by top-down, elitist, or often politicized approaches to cultural heritage management. The methodology and the themes of Reinherit's traveling exhibitions, conflict, craftsmanship, and cultural identity are illustrative of this approach. A series of webinars also serve this goal. An illustrative case is the webinars organized by Arcada on co-creation and prototyping in museums, and on compassion as a rebellious act, also offered by Arcada. In terms of environmental sustainability, including climate change, mitigation, adaptation, and resilience, it is true that the UN Security Council has recognized climate change as a threat multiplier. In line with the ecosystem approach, Reinherit promotes climate and environmental responsible cultural heritage management, both in terms of designing an effective environmental and energy strategy in the context of museum and heritage sites management plans, but also in raising awareness through building and sharing knowledge about human impacts on the environment and climate, teaching skills and promoting positive responses through co-creation. Reinherit Digital Hub, apart from the relevant fact sheet, also promoted empirical knowledge in this domain. For example, the webinars on how to manage museums sustainably, organized by Arte Sostenibile, the webinar on how to make your museum green, hosted by the Bank of Cyprus Cultural Foundation, or the webinar on the contribution of modern technologies to the protection of archaeological sites and monuments, in an environment of intense climatic phenomena organized by the Hellenic Committee of the Blue Seal. Last but not least, in terms of economic sustainability, here we have to specialize the concept of human empowerment in numbers in terms of economic growth and employment rates, mainly in the light of creative economy, but also by addressing challenges related to illicit activities, illicit trade of art objects or activities, as well as the protection of creators and communities' rights. In terms of creative economy, Reinherit builds on the interplay between human creativity, heritage, and ideas on the one hand, and intellectual property, knowledge, and technology on the other. We have a wide range of cultural outputs and products, from conventional ones, exhibitions, to games, virtual e-shop, tools that may be used for expanding cultural experience and products. Reinherit also offers a decentralized version of the creative economy approach. According to Florida's version of creative economy, talent, tolerance, and technology should be concentrated in one place. Reinherit's approach, as implemented through the Digital Hub, offers a decentralized version of creative economy. Entrepreneurial initiatives can be supported transnationally in Europe and beyond, with the participation of more creative talents and less cost in terms of creating new infrastructure. Reinherit also promotes creative tourism through the creation of new experiences, services, and niche cultural products with the use of information technology, digital technologies, towards a more competitive tourism industry. In terms of illicit trade of cultural objects and international property rights, the state-of-the-art report of the project on a sustainable model of cultural heritage management provides not only the necessary recommendations, policy recommendations, but also case studies. Reference to repatriation cases, for example, where digital technologies assisted in keeping the balance between returning the objects to their rightful owners and maintaining the museum's narratives through the use of digitally created replicas is an illustrative example. Contributing to the fight against illicit trafficking is not only an issue of cultural security in the sense of depriving communities of their heritage and the income that may go in hand with that, but it is also high in the international security agenda since it is connected to terrorist financing, so we must not forget that. Cultural security relies on the sustainability of cultural heritage, diversity, and creativity, which are recognized in the 2030 agenda as crucial enablers of sustainable development. They also constitute the conditions for positive peace, bringing the needs of the local populations to the fore and allowing for their entanglement in policy-making processes, paving the way for a constructivist post-liberal agenda implemented what the EU has launched, that the United Nations has launched as a sustaining peace process. The role of new technologies towards the same is crucial. So, taking stock of our experience during Reinherit's life cycle, I would like to recommend the following concerning cultural security. First of all, we have to focus on adaptive, bottom-up approaches to cultural heritage management as a driver of resilience, social inclusion, and economic growth. Secondly, a more consistent integration of culture in the Sustainable Development Agenda beyond 2030 as a matter of security, not only as an economic, environmental, or social factor is needed. Third, and this is related to the other presentations, I think it would be beneficial to export Reinherit methodology in sustaining peace processes, that is prevention and peace building. The use of ICTs in sustaining peace through the enhancement of cultural security is crucial. It may have a positive effect on building communities' relations and cohesion. Investments in such projects also have a significant impact. These are drivers that assist societies in avoiding lapse or relapse into conflict. Open and inclusive spaces, even virtual spaces, to exchange and share knowledge have helped develop new partnerships and opportunities for collective analysis and action. Moreover, they can raise situational awareness, which is very important, in cases cultural security is undermined. Digital tools and new technologies can allow for more predictive analytics to enhance early warning about emerging tensions, the rise of extremism, and conflicts. Reinherit Digital Hub could serve as a model for quick impact projects implemented by UN peacekeeping operations within the context of demand-driven innovation, the methodology used by the project. So thank you very much for your attention. Thank you, Professor Zavraki, for identifying all these concrete examples of the contribution of the Reinherit project to security, cultural security and sustainable development. Now, let's move on to some questions, starting with Mrs. Dandens, okay? And we need to wrap it up slowly. Thank you for your understanding.
Can I speak?
Of course.
Thank you. No, I just would like to first of all thank all the speakers of this session. My question goes to Mr. Eric Klein. I was struck by the example he gave of the Odisha Cathedral, because I was part of the UNESCO mission that was sent after the missile strike in Odisha. And one of the key things that have struck me through my work in Ukraine is that heritage places that are often exposed to the threat of attack have other secondary have vulnerabilities, and since the whole focus is on security and security of the site, these secondary hazards are often ignored, and that's what we saw in Odisha very clearly. There is a secondary risk of fire at all heritage places that we visited. There is also risk of flooding at these sites. So my question is, how well does the military manual address these risks? Because that's something that we need to really consider, and this is something what ICROM is trying to do, and is our methodology is listening to cultural heritage is actually based on a risk assessment, which is a comprehensive risk assessment, and is now also a part of the, it has formed the basis for European methodology for civil protection responses. The other question I want to ask is about the use of remote technologies, and how much have we evaluated on the amount of predictability these remote technologies are giving us. Because from what we have seen, again, from Ukraine to Sudan to other places, much of this data is not available for the professionals on the ground to factor into their responses. and it's not available in real time. And often the professionals on the ground do not have the ability to access satellite data. So with that, anyone can answer.
Well, thank you very much, Mrs. Starden. Your first question was about the military manual speaking out on flooding and other calamities or catastrophes that may occur. It's only in the examples that these subjects are addressed. So not in the actual explanation of the rule set. But as we all know, in times of armed conflict, all the catastrophes that you mentioned, like flooding and great fires, but also diseases, also chemical and nuclear contamination, huge problems, especially for all the people on the ground who really want to question about the public availability of these data. First, for the conflict prediction models, these are all academic projects. So universities like Cornell and Purdue, but also, for instance, the University of Ghent in Belgium, they all have their research published online. I think there is a wide accessibility, but the applicability of these models on actual situations may not be sufficient enough for the ground workers who really, after the first hostilities and the first damage, would like to work. The example of the first example I showed on the conflict prediction has a time span of 1 year, so it looks 1 year ahead. But there are other models for the shorter term, and of course this is only a theoretical model, but it has been tested and it had promising results. On the other hand, there are of course the information channels from intelligence services that are sometimes far more telling but far less accessible. I give you one example. You mentioned Ukraine, rightfully. At the moment I'm a program manager or setting up a program for bilateral help for the culture and heritage of Ukraine between the Netherlands and...
Get in touch with you. I should get in touch with you then.
I think so. I will be delighted to see you again, because we first met in 2014 at the first aid course in Amsterdam. But that's a long time ago.
That was a long time ago, yes.
Satellite observation is done by UNESCO, for instance, by teaming up with UNITAR, the United Nations operational. UNITAR is UNISAT, the satellite program of the UN, with good results. But the other two examples that I mentioned make use of commercially available data. And the only thing they did is to think out an analysis model to retrieve the right information out of this satellite data. And I think, or I would say, I would love to see that this is coming to the public domain, and that this will be open source software too, because it's vital for the whole heritage community. They all have websites, and the first one, the Caucasus Heritage Watch, reports regularly in detail about their findings. I hope this gives an answer to your questions.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, are there any other questions, or should we make some closing remarks, Mrs. Erbaki?
Well, I think we had very interesting debate on the relation of sustainable development, cultural heritage, and different aspects of innovation. I would like to thank you all for your contribution and for this policy-oriented dialogue we have this week. And I hope that we will have the opportunity to meet again and further elaborate new ideas or more specialized topics. Maybe this conference could be separated into 2 or 3 conferences. I would like to thank you all. Those who did not manage to be with us today, and all of you that you have traveled and dedicated time and effort to be with us. And we are going to codify policy recommendations that we have heard today, and we can circulate the document that also incorporated in the Reinherit's policy documents as an appendix as a result of this conference, because this will be very helpful. I think that the European Commission would appreciate that. There's some things that are told here are very specialized, and they really come out of good practice, or practice in general. Thank you so much. I would like to thank Katerina, all our colleagues from Blue Shield, all our colleagues from Reinherit's consortium that have assisted in setting up this conference. Jaime Lopez, Irene Stamatoubi, Marco Bertini, Andrea Oratio, of course. They were not in the scientific community. Sorry. I know.
Sorry.
It was Jaime Lopez and Irene Stamatoubi that assisted in setting up this conference, and I would like to cordially thank them for their time and effort, and of course all our partners from Reinherit that joined us in this effort for their collaboration during the last 4 years and their constructive work. So, see you at the restaurant now. What's the problem? Okay. Oh yes. Apart, we would like. We have already mentioned it to Andrea. We are looking forward to present the policy recommendation of the final conference of Reinherit in Cyprus. Yes. Thank you so much. What about the restaurant? Where is the meeting point? Okay, let's drop it up. Thank you very much. Thank you so much.